Well, happy Valentine's Day, everyone, and welcome to day 7 of the Truth About Weight Loss Summit. We have an incredible lineup of speakers for you today. I'd be happy to be any of their Valentines. They're all wonderful, handsome gentlemen today. And before we introduce them, first we want to just do some takeaways from yesterday. And as you know, well, maybe not know, but if you're listening live, you know that every day after the audio portion ends, which we do audio only so that we can listen with you, interact, and award prizes. But right after the summit ends for the day, you've got about 18 hours to watch the video. We've been including a bonus video every day, a blast from the past from last year's summit. And yesterday was Dr. Columbus Batiste. And he's a cardiologist. And I think about that because it's Valentine's Day. And you might say, well, what do I need this summit for? I'm not overweight. But realize that everything we're teaching you for the diet that we feel is best for reversing overweight and obesity, it's the same diet that we use for heart disease, type 2 diabetes, autoimmune disease. I love how Dr. Greger, who's coming up actually tomorrow on the summit, says, if all the plant-based diet did was reverse heart disease, shouldn't it be the default diet? But Dr. Batiste was so warm and caring, and many of you had commented about that. And if you'd like to see him in person, as well as many of the other summit speakers like Dr. Hans Deal and Dr. Steve Lewenda, we're actually having a live conference in Palm Springs, California, May 15th through 17th at the Renaissance Hotel, and we'd be happy to give you more information about that as well. Tammy Kramer's one of the speakers as well, as am I. Now, remember that when we deliver the summit live, we give you an opportunity to win many wonderful prizes simply by making a comment based on your greatest takeaway and sharing it on your Facebook page. And I want to announce some amazing grand prizes now that were just donated thanks to the Instant Pot Company. And I think we're going to award these on Sunday, the grand finale, and we're probably going to have a little special thing to do for you to win them because they are such valuable prizes. They're donating a Nova 6-quart pressure cooker, an Instant Pot Ace Nova blender, which is similar to the Vitamix, and their newest product, which is called the Instant Vortex 6-quart air fryer, Instant Pot Duo, maybe there's 4 prizes, I don't know. But they're donating a lot of stuff, and they're donating the Air Fryer Duo Crisp, I don't know, good stuff. Sorry, I'm a little tired, but there's some great stuff. So we're going to tell you what you need to do to win those, but one of the things you do need to do is listen live. And please share this summit with your friends. It's completely free. Of course, there's an opportunity to own it for life, which helps us get the message out and spreads the mission and also gets it to people that can't afford it. But just sharing the free summit, really, that means a lot to us. So yesterday, we had 4 amazing speakers. We ended the day with Forks Over Knives chef Darshana Thakur. And one of the things you might have noticed from the cooking demo is she was prepared. She batch cooks, just like Tammy Kramer says that was one of the biggest secrets to her ending 40 years of yo-yo dieting. If you looked inside Chef Darshana's refrigerator, she had beans ready. She had vegetables ready. She had grains ready. So if she comes home late or tired from work, she doesn't have to eat fast food or order a pizza. She can simply make a yummy bowl based on the ingredients she had on hand. And so that's one thing we really want to impress upon you, how important it is to be prepared, because preparation really does trump motivation, especially when you're tired and hungry. She did a fantastic job making easy, healthy, and delicious recipes that are figure friendly, and she really completely understands calorie density when she creates these delicious recipes. Dr. Rick Dina talked about how weight loss actually takes commitment. It doesn't just happen because you want it to, but he also understands calorie density and how if we fill up with the right amount of calories from the right food, we don't have to worry about portion control or weighing and measuring our food on a plate for the rest of our lives and taking our food scale to restaurants. We just have to eat the right food. And like Cyrus and Robbie of Mastering Diabetes, he talked about insulin resistance and how when your cells are sensitive to insulin, you can handle all the carbohydrates, the complex carbohydrates we're telling you to eat, like fruit and even potatoes today, which you'll hear about from a few of our speakers. And he talked about how it's generally easier for people to stay lean when they eat more carbohydrate than more fat, and that you don't have to worry about eating nuts and seeds and avocado. You can eat them, they're healthy, But you got to remember they're very calorically dense, and some people, especially women that have been overweight for a long time, don't seem to be able to easily lose weight and maintain weight loss when they're including a lot of them. He talked about how much fat we actually need and realized if you're eating a lot of greens, you're going to get all those essential fatty acids. And if you're worried, there is a blood test he recommended that you can get. He talked about how our ancestors didn't eat oil, but somehow they still were able to reproduce. So, even if you eat nuts and seeds and avocado, we never recommend oil on this summit. I believe most of the speakers don't, and many of them explain why. Just sheerly from caloric density is one reason, but it's a processed food. There's no fiber, there's no nutrients, and anything you can get in a processed oil, you can get in the whole food. He really talked about how keto is based on a fake premise that carbs increase blood sugar and make you fat. If that was true, then how are so many people losing weight, hundreds and hundreds of pounds, eating a low-fat, whole food, plant-based diet? And he said that when you optimize your calorie intake, it's so much easier when your fat intake is either low to moderate. And again, calorie density, you can't outrun the laws of thermodynamics. And he said when we overconsume calories, we increase free radical production and we slow the aging process. We don't slow down the aging process. We actually facilitate the aging process, and we want to slow it down by eating these healthy foods. And he talked about how when we do lose weight, even though it's difficult, we end up really feeling proud about ourselves. And so that's something to really go for. Dr. Roy Artal, the sleep specialist, who's also board certified in internal medicine and pulmonology, talked about all the medical complications he sees from people that are overweight and obese in his practice. Of course, sleep apnea is one of them that is way more prevalent in an overweight population. But the good news is that many of his patients have reversed it completely when they lost weight and have been able to give up that uncomfortable machine that so many people have to sleep with. He talked about how even in his pulmonary practice, asthma is increased when people are overweight. And he talked about night owls are really not such a thing. Dr. Lyle corroborated that once, that yes, there are some genetic differences, but for the most part, being a night owl is really a behavioral problem, and that caffeine and alcohol are definitely not our friends, especially if sleep is a problem. Caffeine has a very long half-life. I believe it's 17 hours. And that he tells his patients the same advice that the World Health Organization has said, that no amount of alcohol is safe. It's a neurotoxin, it's a carcinogen, and it may help you fall asleep fast, but it leads to an awakening in about 2 to 3 hours. I think one of the most fascinating things I learned from Dr. Artal was one of the articles in the scientific literature he quoted about how when people are in a calorie-restricted state, if they are sleep deprived, they are more likely to lose lean muscle mass than if they're not sleep deprived, where they're more likely to lose fat. And that's what we want you to lose, is fat. And he also talked about how there is a correlation between short sleep time and obesity, and that one of the things that makes our sleep better is exercise, and that there's nothing wrong with taking a 15 to 20 minute siesta after lunch. You don't want to nap too long, because then he says you'll get into sleep inertia and not feel invigorated. But many cultures other than the United States take these little siestas after lunch, and there's nothing wrong with doing that, unless of course you're driving a truck or an airplane. We hope that you wouldn't do that. The Team Sherzai blew us away with all the information on the brain. That is definitely one interview you're going to want to listen to again. I mean, all lifestyle diseases are serious, and people always worry about cancer, but 5.8 million people in the United States have Alzheimer's. 2/3 of them are women, and we're spending $540 billion a year on this disease. So it's pretty serious. And believe it or not, your weight can determine your, whether or not you get it. I know a lot of people think, well, I'm only a little bit overweight, it's fine. And, maybe it is fine, but according to these doctors, you can't really be overweight and truly healthy, that your predisposition to all these diseases goes up exponentially the more overweight you are. they talked about how every single meal breaks a brain or builds a brain. And while you don't feel it meal per meal because it's a cumulative process, what you eat has a profound effect on your brain health. Even though the brain is this 3-pound organ, is only 2% of our body weight, what you eat makes a difference. And that you don't have to be eating fish or fish oil, because these omega-3 fatty acids, they're plentiful in whole plant foods. They said, get it where the fish gets it from. You get it from algae. And they said all these favorable studies that say fish oil and fish is so great. Well, that's because they're comparing it to meat or processed foods. They're never comparing them to whole plant food, which is what we recommend. They talked about how we're definitely living longer, but certainly not living healthier. And that as a population, we generally don't address brain health. They talked about how exercise is so important, not for weight loss, because it pushes the brain to make more connections. It creates brain growth hormones and improves brain capacity. But without good nutrition, they said, you can run on a treadmill all day and it'll have no effect. And they recommend at least 30 minutes of strenuous exercise at least 5 times a week. And by strenuous, they mean not a stroll in the park or a gentle yoga class. They mean you need to get tired and you need to sweat. And we learned the same thing from Dr. Vivian Chen about how important sweating is to release toxins. They said you have to create an environment where you move throughout the day, or it really negates the 30 minutes of exercise. So be like the Blue Zones, be active all day, especially if you have a sedentary job. Get up every hour, do some push-ups against your counter, do some squats, sit on a stability ball. Ask your office if you can have a standing desk or a treadmill desk, but we need to move. And interestingly enough, they said that the leg strength in those big muscles in your leg, those are most correlated with brain strength. So the bigger your legs, the bigger your brain. And BDNF, that brain-derived neurotrophic factor, it's most affected by leg strength. They have a little phrase, don't retire, rewire. I thought that was great. And they said that good stress, when it's driven by our purpose, actually grows the brain. And they talked about how when you feed kids a sugary cereal for breakfast or feeds kids poorly, they're showing that even 2-year-olds are now having lower IQ, and they're seeing inflammation in children 12 or younger. And they said that when you think of things like grain brain, that is completely junk science, and that the foods that are good for the brain are the foods we're recommending on the summit: fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, nuts, and seeds. The foods that are bad for the brain, which are also foods that are bad for losing weight, are meat, cheese, dairy products, and saturated fat. They were such an inspiring couple. I loved everybody. I love everybody on this summit. I wouldn't interview them if I didn't. But today, I especially love our first speaker because I don't think I would be here as Chef AJ without him. He gave me my first big break in 2009 when he invited me to present at his Celebrity Chef Weekend, and he's given me so many other opportunities to present. A lot of us owe a lot to Dr. McDougall, who's been doing this, paving the way for us for 50 years. It is on his shoulders that we stand, that we become tall. And I love how he always gives credit to those that came before him, his mentors like Dr. Walter Kempner, who got people non-diabetic and lean by giving them white rice, fruit juice, sugar. Incredible. And his other mentors that have been mentioned by many people on the summit, like Dr. Dennis Burkett, who one of our speakers, Dr. David Jenkins, actually knew, or Nathan Pritikin, or Roy Swank. Dr. McDougall is going to talk about the forgotten food group that holds the key to satiety. He's going to make potatoes great again. Dr. Stefan Guillenet is going to talk about outsmarting the instincts that make us overeat. He actually spoke at one of the McDougall Advanced Study Weekends. That's how I heard about him, and I have his book, The Hungry Brain. Dr. Walt Willett, who is a rock star in the nutrition community. He is admired by almost every doctor I've ever met for the work he's been doing at Harvard. Very nice man. Is going to talk about how to solve the obesity epidemic, but with a different spin, for the sake of our children. We're the first generation of children that won't outlive their parents. And to solve this obesity epidemic for the planet and ourselves. And we'll end with a cooking demo and a success story. True North executive chef Ramses Bravo, who is going to be creating seductive flavors for weight loss, which is perfect for Valentine's Day. So remember to share the comments on your Facebook page. Always tell us where you're from, and please share this summit with those you love. Take it away, my hero, Dr. John McDougall. Hi, Dr. McDougall, and welcome to the Real Truth About Weight Loss Summit. I am so excited to get to talk to you.
Okay, well, good. Great for me too, AJ, as always.
Dr. McDougall, you've been a physician for over 50 years, and you know that we have an obesity epidemic now, and I imagine that you only keep seeing people get larger and larger. Why is this happening, and what can we do about it?
Well, there are, it's really in my career, which expands since 1968. In my career, I've seen people get fatter. They've gone from an adult rate of about 15 to 17% obesity to where, we're approaching 40% obesity. And by 2030, if we're around then still, we're talking about 70% of the population being obese, not just overweight, in the southeast United States. So, and it's an epidemic that's spreading all over the world. Simply put, it's caused by the accessibility of so many calories in such a tasty form. It's just there, and people can afford it at great price to their health and the health of the planet. But it's not like we get this for free. Anyway, people are doing poorly in their health. Diabetes is becoming an epidemic worldwide. Before 1980, for example, there was virtually no diabetes in China. And now, last time I looked in 2013, which is 6 years ago, 12% of the population had frank diabetes in China, and half were pre-diabetic. So you can go to every country in the world and see the same trend, as we have cable news and we have the American way spread all over the world. And the ability to, again, we're not doing this for free, to tap into fossil fuels and the high technology we have. We're able to distribute this kind of wealth worldwide and overnutrition worldwide. And people are just getting fatter and sicker, like they always have when they were overnourished. It's nothing new. There's just the number of people that have access to rich food. As I've said many times, there is a place for government, and that place for government is to protect us from domestic and foreign threats. In this country today, we have some domestic threats. We're not going to get into them, but we certainly do have some domestic threats. But for years, we've had domestic threats from the tobacco industry, from the alcohol industry, from the pollution industries, and from the food industries. And you're not going to solve them by asking IBM or Apple or Ford Motor Company to form an investigative team to somehow protect their employees from obesity and heart disease and diabetes. You can't do that. That's why you have governments. Just like you can't have a company like Chevrolet form their own Army and Navy and Air Force to take and defend us from the conflicts that are going on around the world. So government is not doing its job. It certainly has the mechanisms to do it. It has the USDA, the Human Health Services Organization. So it's not like there aren't people who have the opportunity to do the right thing. It's just that the money's all in the wrong direction. It's in the direction of keeping you fatter and sicker and, giving you, and then there's a downstream to all this sickness and fatness too. You got to realize there are a whole bunch of people who win by you being ill. And those would be hospitals and people who sell CAT scanners and medications. And of course, it goes down to your doctors and the doctors' office staff. I mean, there are lots of people making money downstream from all this sickness, insurance companies, because we are having such good times and because death is not so intimate. It's not like you take and bite a piece of double cheeseburger or double pepperoni pizza and you drop dead. It's a slow death. It takes decades to kill. And certainly the signs are there. But you might, you might beat the odds, just like with cigarette smoking. You might beat the odds. Every smoker believes so. Otherwise, they wouldn't continue to smoke. Same thing with drunks. They think they're going to beat the odds somehow or another. They're going to get out of this without solving the problem. You might beat the odds. There are people who smoke and drink and eat cheeseburgers and live to be 85, 90, 95 years old on rare occasions. But it's not likely, and you're going to suffer a lot along the way. They have a statement that people are living longer, but they're living unhealthier and fatter than they did in the past. Well, we can change that. We have the information. It's not like there's a lack of knowledge as to what the problem is or a lack of knowledge as to the solution. There's a lack of will is what there is. Anyway, there's just no reason to change. People don't see an imminent threat to their health or their livelihood, and fat has become normal in the sense you look at commercials and pretty much everybody's overweight. So to be thin, like you and I are, AJ, is really an abnormal situation, even though the actuaries, if you look back at the insurance actuaries based on height and weight, we're perfect. I weigh in at 140 pounds. I'm 6 foot tall. So, I'm a trim body weight. I'm sure you're a trim body weight too. Mary's a trim body weight. Jeff's a trim body weight. Doug's a trim body weight. It's just, if you eat this way, that's what happens, period. If you're going to eat rich foods that are full of fat and, secondarily sugar, and you're going to get, you're going to have problems. You're going to be malnourished. So somebody ought to tell you that. Somebody ought to really tell you. They haven't told you that. They're still telling you can live on the basic four, which is what is it? Chocolate marshmallow ice cream, vanilla ice cream, strawberry ice cream, and blueberry ice cream. That's the basic four. I don't know. It's a crazy world. But there's just people have lost their moral compass, as people have always done. I believe in the true nature of Homo sapiens. They certainly weren't designed for self-preservation.
Dr. McDougall, you've written so many best-selling books, but one of them specifically addresses the obesity epidemic. It gives the solution. It's called the starch solution. Yet starches continue to be vilified as fats continue to be glorified. How can everyone get this backwards?
I don't know. It mystifies me, especially since they can see for themselves. I mean, there are many of your listeners who are over the age of 50, and they remember the times before 1980 when we had a whole population of the world which lived on starch-based diets. We're talking particularly about the Asians. They're easy to identify with, but some of you might identify with people in rural Central America, for example. So, you have your own experiences to tell you this plain and simply is not true, that starches do not make you fat. And if you look at the data, and I don't know, just look at the number of commercials on TV and what they address. I guess I have to take that back. These days, they address the really expensive drugs for treating rheumatoid arthritis and so on. They used to focus mainly on fast food. That's where the big money was. And drugs, they're pretty good on drugs still. I watch enough cable TV to know what's important in the world today of medicine. Pushing drugs that are ineffective and toxic, and buying disability insurance, health insurance, etc. Medicine's a big business, and that's about the only thriving business in this country. Anyway, I'm getting a little off topic. You wanted to know about starch solution. I've known this, AJ, as you well know. I've known these facts since I was a young man. I've known them since the late 70s, certainly by 1977. I was fully involved. I wasn't perfect, but I was fully involved myself in the scientific learning and the personal dietary change that has led me to what I understand today and what I follow today. Anyway, the information's been around a long time. It's just that people have not wanted to go in this direction. They wanted to eat ice cream cones, and industries they're very happy to sell them ice cream cones.
Well, you mentioned that starch don't make you fat, but they actually contribute to weight loss. How is that possible? Why are starches so good for weight loss?
Well, because they're the right food for people. I mean, it's what people are designed to eat. It's just like, I don't know, lily pads or whatever hippopotamuses eat. They are their food. I mean, there's some kind of grasses and leaves and stuff that hippopotamuses eat, or elephants eat whatever grasses and stuff. They're designed to put on extra body fat. They're fat animals. We're not designed that way. Throughout all of human history, the human being has been a trim, hardy, agile, physical figure. This has only been a modern phenomenon. So when you go back to the food that's intended for the human being is able to re-establish its norm. The problem is with the food being so rich, so dense in fat, so insulinogenic, in other words, it raises insulin levels, the body just can't make compensations. But in part, the body is designed to store a little extra fat for wintertime, but not so much fat that would inhibits us from getting around. So, we have some natural mechanisms that will put on fat. And, once those mechanisms have reached a point of survival, say 30, 40, 50 pounds for a wintertime, unfortunately, the food is still so rich that, people keep getting fatter. And besides that, a tough winter never comes for them to burn off the fat. they're not even out shoveling the snow anymore. In part because there's no snow, but in part because they got somebody else to shovel it for them. The food is just too rich for the human body to handle for most people.
Right. Well, carbohydrates are 4 calories a gram. Aren't potatoes something like 1 calorie per gram?
They are because, they talk about pure white sugar being 4 calories per gram. And those are different calories than fat calories. A little basic chemistry will teach you that sugar is a carbohydrate, which is a ring structure in chemistry, which is very stable. And that ring structure of carbons, 5 carbons put together in a ring, it's difficult to break it down into a chain structure, which are what fats are. They're long chains of carbon. So the human body is not very efficient at that. So carbohydrate is burned off primarily as heat or non-athletic movements that the body increases. It'll store a little bit, get ready for winter, but that's all.
You're known for so many McDougalisms, as I say them. For example, people are looking for good news about their bad habits. But my favorite is probably one you've been saying for a very long time that I even had printed on a mug, which is the fat you eat is the fat you wear.
Yeah.
How did you come across this knowledge? Because a lot of people say we got to have fat, our brain needs fat, we got to take fish oil or DHA, we need fat to absorb the nutrients in the vegetables. This isn't what you teach. How did you discover this, and why is it true that the fat you eat is the fat you wear?
I just read the basic science. There's a whole section, and I outlined this section of scientific studies that show that it's difficult to convert carbohydrate or sugar into fat. So that's the first thing you have to know is the human body is not very efficient at de novo lipogenesis, the new production of fat from sugar, de novo lipogenesis. So first you need to establish that. Then the second thing that you need to, for the human being, as I told you, we talked about hippopotamuses and elephants and cows and so on. They have more efficient conversion mechanisms to make that conversion and to produce body fat than the human being does. So once you get that established, that it's very difficult to do, then the next thing you have to establish is that the fat you eat is the fat you wear. Well, probably the simplest thing to do is to look at the fat in people's diet, see what kind of fat it is, because fat's varied. They have all kinds of different chemical structures, different double bonds, anatomical structures and physiologic functions and so on. So fats are different. But if you take and biopsy somebody's body fat, what you'll find is what's in their body fat reflects 1-to-1 what is on their table in terms of the types of fats. For example, if you eat trans fats, like are found in margarines and shortenings, then what you'll be full of when the scientist comes and biopsies your buttocks, thigh, or abdomen is that your body's full of these trans fats. Same thing with fish fat. If you eat fish fat, you're going to be full of omega-3 fats. So, I mean, the fat you eat is the fat you wear. I think those are two pretty important pieces of evidence, which, by the way, I never hear discussed. And then you could get into the appetite satisfying mechanisms of fat and carbohydrate. Carbohydrate shuts off the hunger drive appropriately. Says, hey, you've eaten what you're supposed to eat, carbohydrate, so therefore your hunger drive will be appropriately satisfied. We call it satisfied, not depressed. But fat doesn't do that. Fat does not turn the hunger drive off. And that would be important for you to know. Is you wonder why you say to yourself, gee whiz, I just ate this big piece of steak and this glob of cheese and this half a bottle of olive oil, and I'm still starving to death. Well, it's carbohydrate that shuts off the hunger drive, not fat. So the body doesn't really perceive that you've eaten, except for maybe some physical pain that you might have in your abdomen. But the satisfaction you're looking for up here and all over the body, in terms of having eaten and given yourself the nourishment that you need, doesn't come from fat. It comes from carbohydrate. Well, another thing you could look at is you could look at world athletes. Certainly, a world athlete would demonstrate the optimal diet. It should. And this has been studied for thousands of years. And people discovered, I can go back 2,000 years ago to the gladiators, and I can show you how the winning gladiators ate a high carbohydrate diet. They lived basically on barley with a few beans. They were vegans. These days, still the winning athletes for triathlon, marathon events, for your endurance events, are always the high carbohydrate eaters. They're mostly from Kenya and Ethiopia these days. 80% of the diet's corn. This is no secret. You could go so many different ways. You could look at malformations in little babies and find out the rich Western diet hurts you there. You could look at incidence of Alzheimer's disease. AJ, I've been at this. You've been at it for maybe 10, 15, 20 years. I've been at it for 40, good solid 40 years. And, I first found this out in probably 1977. I thought this would be a discovery that the world would come running to my doorstep to learn about. Hadn't happened. In fact, things have really gotten, by many parameters, much, much worse than they were in the 1970s. Back in the 1970s, we had things like the McGovern Report, which are the dietary goals for the United States, which are supposed to be like the Surgeon General's report on smoking and health that Luther Terry put out in 1964. But it never happened. The industry fought back and industry won. But in the 70s, we seemed to have a pendulum swinging in the right direction. In the 1970s, I had the same literary agent as Robert Atkins. And I believe his name was Cohen. But this guy, made me lots of money, sold lots of my books. He used to tell me back then that he couldn't sell Atkins. He couldn't sell a book from Atkins. If he paid for the cup of coffee for the meeting, they wouldn't buy it with his books. And so we're all high carbohydrate, Pritikin, Burkett, McDougall, Dean Ornish coming in at that time. And then the pendulum swung back. I just never believed it would swing back to the Atkins type of eating. But that's the way people are. They can be swayed easily. I mean, look at the politics that are going on today.
So, Dr. McDougall, is it safe to eat a diet with no overt fats added? Because we're told that we've got to have fat for our brain. We have to have nuts and seeds. What do you think?
Well, I know that, part of this message is absolutely true. We do need fats. There are some fats that the human being cannot make, just like other mammals can't make these fats. They're called essential fats. Let's see, can other animals make them? No, they can't. As a matter of fact, only plants can desaturate at the carbon 3 and the carbon 6 position. So no animal, no mammal, no, I don't know, I doubt any insect can do it either, can make these essential fats. They're only made by plants. So you need to get these fats. Fortunately, they're in plants in adequate amounts, always. There's only one example of a fat-free diet that I can remember reading about in the scientific literature. And it happened during the 1930s. And that was the time when bottle feeding was being pushed upon American women as opposed to breastfeeding. And when they did that, they pushed these formulas on the babies in the United States. The babies were getting fat because these were high-fat cow's milk formulas. So the response of the medical community, the scientific community, was to put the babies on low-fat formula. I mean, really low-fat formula. And the babies developed fatty acid deficiency, which was changes in their skin. It was very serious. But it had to be a synthetic diet to do it. Otherwise, all natural diets provide adequate amounts of fat. Even a diet such as the Eskimo would eat during during their most winter times, a diet all of animals. There's enough essential fat in the tissues because the animal, in this case, let's just pick on the fish. The polar bear ate the fish, but the fish ate the seaweed. Seaweed made the essential fats, and so it was brought up through the food chain. You don't eat a lot of essential fat, and you can't eat a fat-free diet. You have to make it up artificially to do it. There's always enough fat in the food.
That's amazing. So we don't have to pound down the nuts and seeds every day.
No, unless you want to be fatter. Now, I can think of a circumstance where, let's say somebody lost a lot of weight, which, you and I have both done. I don't know whether you realize it, but I've added up the figures and I weighed 90 pounds more than I weigh now at one time. And, most of the fat I was carrying around, I got from McDonald's and the local hot dog place and Jim Daly's with their green hot dogs. And, I packed on some really toxic stuff. And I've lost that weight, of course. I've lost it several times, but I've lost it recently. And I'm a trim body fat. Now, if I wanted to get a little heavier, which I doubt if I will at my age, if I wanted to get a little bit heavier, I could repopulate my fat cells with some pretty clean fat. And that's what I do. I pick on nuts and seeds and avocados, and I make myself some tahini salad dressings, which would violate the rules a little bit by breaking the food up with a blender. And that would be one reason, I guess, to eat fatty food if you want to be a little bigger, a little less trim. I'm sure you've heard that you're too thin and I'm too thin, and but that's, of course, I think a sour grapes argument.
Dr. McDougall.
You're too thin. You're too thin. You're too thin. You should be, 40 pounds overweight, just like me.
Yep. That's what we were both recently speaking at a conference in Washington, and we heard a lot of that both of us, we don't look good because we're just too thin. So, oh well.
People are kind enough not to say that to my face.
I think you look great, Dr. McDougall. I've often heard you talk about Dr. Walter Kempner, and I hear so many people say, I can't eat carbs, they make me fat. Yet with an all white rice diet, he was able to not only reverse diabetes in his patients, but get them to a very, very lean weight. How is that possible?
Well, your own experiences. Every one of you listening out there, even if you're a young person, even if you're in your teens, you could look this up historically. There was once a time when there were no fat Asians. There were 2 billion Asians, and nobody was fat. You could see, you could watch newsreels during the Vietnam War of 100,000 people in a town square in an Asian country. Not a single person was overweight. So, how can you possibly say rice makes you fat? As China and Vietnam and Cambodia and the other countries in the Far East have given up their rice, even though it was white rice, they've given it up. They've doubled their fat and their animal food intake in the last 20 years. And it shows, especially among the wealthier people, it shows. My observations, certainly haven't studied this, but if you look at North Korea, everybody there except their leader is thin. Everybody. Their leader, of course, I would only guess, eats more rich food than the average person of North Korea. Anyway, People who say that rice makes you fat are just, I don't know, they have to close their eyes to so many obvious, easy to make observations, experiences. So I'm sorry for you, but you suffer from the same blindness, I'm sure, in many areas of your life, and we will overcome you. So be prepared.
You have treated thousands of patients in your McDougall 10-day live-in program in Santa Rosa, California. Have you ever seen a low-fat, starch-centered diet not work, either in terms of weight loss or reversing so many of these lifestyle diseases that plague most Americans?
Well, not in terms of weight loss. Generally you can figure out where people are, having their issues. It's usually around, when it comes to people who have gotten years of my message, it's usually high-fat plant foods. There's still that vegan cheesecake is something they really aren't willing to give up yet. I remember actually a relative recently, we were talking, having a little family get together, and she gained 40 pounds since the last time I saw her, which was, I think, only 4 months before. And she was, of course, terribly embarrassed. And, her husband was a relative. Anyway, it took us 3 days of having fun together, laughing and so on. And finally, the third evening, we're sitting together, and she says, "Do you think the 10 vegan cookies I had before I go to bed could have anything to do with the weight I gained in the last 4 months?" And we all started laughing. So if you pursue it far enough, you'll find out that people do not, as they say, violate the laws of thermodynamics. And your best chance of being permanently the weight you want to be in, the strength you want to be in, the endurance you want to be in, the health you want to be in, is to focus your diet on starches. And refined starches are not optimal. Unrefined are optimal. But if you can't get unrefined, then refined certainly better than trying to fuel your body on grease and animal foods.
So many people, when they're diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, because their doctors don't know anything about nutrition, advocate for a keto diet, which unfortunately does often reverse their diabetes and cause them to lose weight. So how does that happen, and how can we direct them more towards the starches?
And I wrote this, by the way, in an article in Mayo Clinic Proceedings, so it's published in the scientific literature, is people equate weight loss with good health. But going on the Atkins type diet, ketogenic diet, in my mind, would be equivalent to taking chemotherapy to lose weight and to lower your cholesterol, to lower your blood pressure, because it does. If you're on cancer chemotherapy, you get all those things. You get weight loss, you get lower cholesterol, you get lower blood pressure, et cetera, but you certainly don't live longer. So you can eat a diet that makes you so sick, like the Atkins diet. That's a make yourself sick diet. You can eat a diet that makes yourself so sick that you don't eat. You can take chemotherapy to lose weight too. Cure your diabetes with chemotherapy too, just by not eating because you're so sick. That's what it boils down to.
What I'm hearing from most of the experts on this summit is that the diet that is best for health is also the best for weight loss.
Well, yeah, because the human frame is naturally trim. I mean, we've been out trying to outrun tigers for a lot longer than anybody. We have been naturally a certain size. I think being big is a survival, over fat is a survival disadvantage. It's not personally good for you as an individual, nor is it good for your society for you to be over fat.
Well, you raised your family eating this way, and I believe you have like 7 grandchildren that eat this way. So is this way of eating also healthy for children, or don't kids need more fat?
Well, you can make that argument that kids need more fat. And what I would do is I'd add extra nuts and seeds and peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and things like that to the kids' diet. Certainly you want to give the kids enough calories. And my children, I think age 8, and they're very big kids. In fact, they outsize Mary and I, which seems kind of impossible considering we came from the age of bigger kids bigger than their parents. And our kids were raised quite strictly. I would say, pretty close to 100% on the type of diet we recommend. Now that when I say pretty close to 100%, we didn't rule over our kids in terms of what they ate outside the home, et cetera. But, they're nice sized kids because they had a lot of good food during their adolescent times. And you'll hear people argue that, well, you don't want to eat this kind of diet that AJ and Dr. McDougall recommend because the kids will be small. And, people used to be smaller. You remember the size of the armor when you went to the museum, the Middle Age knights. They were only 5 foot taller. George Washington's bed was only 5.5 feet long. People were smaller back then, but that's because they ate fewer calories during adolescence. We didn't have refrigeration. Food scarcity was common then. And so you don't have to worry about your kids being big enough as long as you make them as big as you want, as long as you feed them adequate calories. In fact, there's good argument, and you and I have not discussed this, but I can show you how eating the rich Western diet will change your hormones in a boy or a girl so that their epiphyseal growth plates, these are the growth plates at the end bones, close earlier on the Western diet. So they actually end up smaller, shorter, less bone growth than if they ate a healthy diet like I fed my kids. And I think it's evident in the size my children are. One of the boys is 6'4", the other's 6'1", and the other's probably 5'7". So they're pretty good sized kids.
Wow. When people come to the McDougall program, I'm guessing a lot of them come from the standard American diet, eating a lot of animal products and processed food. How long does it take them to really enjoy a low-fat, starch-based diet?
Well, I think as long as they start out with some salt on the food, they like it from the beginning. And that's why we provide salt shakers on the table. We don't put salt in the food, or at least where we do, it's obvious. And so I don't find the adjustment really difficult in people. Maybe I'm not asking the right questions. Maybe I'm not asking them, how bad are you suffering? What I seem to hear, and maybe it's because I want to hear it, but I don't think so, because I've been hearing it from 3,000-4,000 people, is that, the food really tastes good and I really enjoy it. And I get to eat a lot. And I get to even take it back to my room if I want. And I could put, Korean hot sauce on it and make it taste good. So I don't think there's really a big taste adjustment for most people. As long as you give them the salt, you give them their favorite spices, and you give them enough to eat. And, of course, we do a good job. I have to say that people who have been, like some of the conferences that you and I have been to recently, and people who have been to our clinic, they say the food at your clinic is much better. It's because, we've been doing this for a long time. And we've gotten really good at it. We've gotten very creative. We have a pretty good idea on what's going to satisfy most palates. And we don't make the mistake that's so commonly made, AJ. And I speak specifically to our vegan conferences, which, by the way, have at least become low fat. We don't have all the vegetables swimming in oil, but they still haven't starch-based their meal plans. And so people at award dinners, et cetera, leave starving because they tried to satisfy them with plates of broccoli and kale and other vegetables. And whereas they didn't really focus on the starch and making that very appetizing. And plenty more. You need lots more to eat. As you well know, we eat a lot more food than most folks do. And so I don't find it, again, maybe I'm not asking the right question, but I don't find people have problems adjusting. They will say, I don't like everything, or I'm never going to eat tofu. And, well, fine. You don't have to like everything. You have to find one thing you like for breakfast. You find one or two things you like for lunch and dinner, and just eat the same things over and over again. No big deal. Use your favorite spices. Most of you can use a little salt on the food. And a little sugar.
Why is it that most of your medical colleagues just don't know this information, or what they do know, it's the exact opposite?
Well, you're talking to all degrees of interest. My medical colleagues range from people like George Guthrie and Neil Bernard, and Colin Campbell and Dean Ornish and so on, who really understand the basis. I mean, they may be a little different in a few minor points. So there are some well-educated, well-read people who do understand. And then there's a whole new generation of young people who are trying to understand, some more aggressively than others. They're reading the same basic scientific studies I had to read to become really grounded. And the reason I get away with so much of what I get away with is, I took control to become very grounded in the research and what it says, and not just the basic concepts or what turned into my basic beliefs, but, the pillars that support those basic beliefs. So, we got a whole young generation that's coming up. It's going to take them a couple decades to really become believers, because it's hard to make the transition, even as a medical person. It's hard to stop pushing the drugs. It's hard to stop being afraid all the time of being sued. And so anyway, then there's the rest of the guys and gals, which are what probably 95% of the people out there who are pushing treatments that in some cases are very valuable. And, they should be able to look themselves in the mirror every morning, like the people who replace cataracts, the ophthalmologists or the bone doctors who put our broken bones back together. They do some miraculous work. But then there are the general doctors out there, and the cancer specialists, and the cardiologists, and the diabetologists, and people who should know better. They really should. And it's been brought up on several occasions that this is malpractice. To fail to offer people the cure for heart disease, type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, constipation, the cure. And we fail to do that in, I'm guessing 95% of the offices. I'm probably being generous. It's probably more like 99% of the general medical offices fail to, probably 99.9999% of the general medical offices fail to offer adequate nutritional education. Some of them are just downright contrary. In other words, you can go into maybe a third of the doctor's offices around the country, around the world, and they'll push a high protein Atkins type diet on you. And I'm just guessing a third. And then you'll find the rest of them pushing the Mediterranean diet, which is, another scam. And at least it's a scam in the right direction. And then you'll find maybe, a tiny percent that really understand human nutrition, really are going for the cure for the patients, not as they say, to manage disease. This is the key word in all of medical businesses, all profession. This will manage your diabetes, and will manage your cancer, and will manage your high blood pressure, will manage your constipation. Now, why don't we just cure it? But I think one point you asked me about that I didn't tell you about, I do want to make clear, is there are points of no return. I mean, you can damage your lungs by smoking enough so that you have scar tissue. That scar tissue is not going to go away. I don't care for how many years you quit smoking, you've done the damage. If you cut off your fingers in a meat grinder, that was a joke. If you cut off your fingers in a meat grinder, they're not going to grow back because you switch to potatoes. So there are permanent changes that occur in you and I that the body just plain and simple has dealt with the best it can by, hopefully making some scar tissue and adaptation so it can continue on. So don't expect that you're going to have the youth of a 17-year-old. Well, you might feel like it. I'm sure you've had people come back to you, AJ, on many occasions say, I haven't felt this young in 30 years. And they really mean it. I haven't felt this good in, I can't remember how long it's been. And that's not after 4 years of understanding the truth. That's after like 4 days. I really have, that's why when you ask me about people liking the food and adhering to the program, it takes until about Tuesday. We start Friday night. It takes about 4 days. And then they're so appreciative of, finally having some understanding, some control and by the way, which is cost-free and side effect-free and good for the planet and animals and good grief, everything else, even good for the insects. It's good for everybody. And well, about that time, they start getting very appreciative, even the ones that were brought to our clinic kicking and screaming. They realize what a gift they have, even people who are sent there without any cost to them by, say, Whole Foods or CenturyLink, the telecommunications company, who are investing in their employees. Even though maybe they can become very raw in their understanding, or even be a keto person or a GMO-focused person or a gluten-focused person, we turn them around in about 4 days. And I think it's the talent of our staff. And of course, you have that kind of talent too, AJ. That's the thing about you, is your enthusiasm and your understanding of basic science and your caring about people makes your communication skills extremely effective.
Do you find that you have to convince people to actually eat more because they're so indoctrinated to eat small portions, especially of the starch? Because if no starch, no satiety. We
do that. I also find them getting the salads really heavy. They paid $5,000 to come to be with us for 12 days, 10 days. And they want to make sure that when they leave, they have the best looking numbers possible. So they starve themselves sometimes, and they hit the salad leaves really hard. And I say, look, you're wasting your money. Trying to teach you how to make this permanent and enjoyable, cost effective, planet friendly, etc. And you're having a hard time getting rid of some of your old thinking that you need to starve. Some of your hunger drive was designed improperly. Your stomach is too big for your body, and all kinds of other nonsense you've been told. You got to get over that, and you've got to get over the idea that feeling bad by trying to live off of kale and lettuce and celery is not the intention. It's not the way it's supposed to be. So unless you find a meal plan that offers you satisfaction, improvement in health, which you can see obviously in your bowel function immediately, improves your economic situation, fits in with your religious beliefs, you're concerned about animal abuse and rights, and especially you're concerned about the planet. Unless you can find a diet that most aligns itself with those objectives, then you better keep looking, because you ain't found it yet. And it is out there. And I believe that you and I have that program. And if people would just take the time to open their eyes and look, AJ, they would see it. This is not something you have to have a PhD in biochemistry to understand. You just have to have a belief that whatever this means, your creator didn't make a mistake, and you're designed to look good, feel good, and function well for a lifetime. The human lifespan is 85 years. And that's what you were God-given. And if you're not getting it, looking good, feeling good, functioning well, enjoying what you're doing, then there's something wrong, because you're not obeying the rules. I would guess, if I could talk to a hippopotamus, that they would enjoy those lily pads a lot. And if I offered them a T-bone steak, even the most special one from Kansas, they probably would not be happy with me. So, I have a basic faith in human nature. There are not mistakes out there.
That's well said. Power to the potato. So at the recent conference that we both spoke at, you gave a very different kind of lecture. It seems that you have a new passion these days. Would you like to talk about it?
I would very much, AJ, and I hope that we can do another conference on it sometime as people become more interested and less afraid. I've spent the last, since 1968, so it's been 51 years, working in medicine, learning about the kind of medicine that I practice, and sharing that in many venues, including TV shows and worldwide played TV shows and radio shows and books that have been national bestsellers. And I had the good fortune of marrying the practical side of this whole program, and her name is Mary, of course. And I've accomplished all that. And there are many people like yourself and other doctors out there that have learned this, or at least the opportunity is there for them to learn what I've learned and to practice like I've practiced. There's no new discoveries that need to be made as far as how to cure people with diet therapy, what the human being ought to be eating, not only for self, but for planet. And then really the questions are no longer out there. At least when it comes to medical care. You know, I've written it down, I put it on video. There are many other people who've helped do this, so it's out there. I'm no longer ahead of my time, AJ. Now I have another mission, and the next mission is something that, again, is new because I don't see anybody else taking it up with the enthusiasm that I am. And that's the connection between planetary extinction, destruction, and the food, which is the largest playing card there is. And people don't realize it, won't talk about it. During the Republican conventions of 2004 and 2008, they didn't even mention climate change. That was an unmentionable word. During our Democratic convention these days, what we are doing is we're talking about climate change. In fact, we have Jay Inslee from Washington, who dedicated his whole campaign to climate change. And we have Cory Booker, who's a vegan. And we have Yang, who's talking about how we all should become vegetarian for the planet. But that's it, man. They clam down right after that. When asked if people should really do this, become vegan, they don't address it, or they say, no, they shouldn't. It's too politically toxic for them to discuss it. Even Greta Thunberg, who is the young child, a 15-year-old girl who's made the biggest impression on the world in terms of her plea to save the future for her generation. Even she doesn't discuss diet to the enthusiasm, the emphasis that should be discussed. The latest book out on climate change and food, We Are the Weather. The author says, he can't give up his cheese and eggs, his dairy and eggs, and he sneaks away for an occasional cheeseburger or some burger, meat burger of some kind. So I just don't see people put in the emphasis on something that is the biggest playing card out there that we have to play, or we're not going to win this salvation of our planet. And that playing card is diet. The World Health Organization has been telling us since 2006 that the livestock industry accounts for 18% of the greenhouse gases, as opposed to transportation, that's 14%. The World Watch Institute has been telling us since shortly after that over half the greenhouse gases are being produced by the livestock industry. And they also say by switching to a vegan diet, major research has been published in the last 10 years that says switching to a vegan diet can cut greenhouse gas emissions from the agricultural sector. Remember, that's at least half of the toxic environmental production, at least half, that we can cut this down by 70%. That's the average figure. Some say as high as 80%. That if I'm doing my math right, that's a chunk of 30, 40, 50% in the total reduction in greenhouse gas production by doing something that you and I can do right now for our next meal. And that is, instead of eating the animals, we eat the starches, which is the human diet, which is what 99.9999999% of people who ever walk this earth have eaten. This is a blip in human history. This eating all these animals. What do they say? 80 billion animals a year. So anyway, that's what I'm going to spend my time doing. I hope somebody's out there to listen. Right now, they're too afraid to even talk about it. It's politically toxic. People believe, but they don't believe enough to really do anything about it. Yes, it's true, but it's just not. They don't see the relevance. They don't see the immediacy. They don't see the urgency. I'm going to have as a lot of voices I can. I hope you'll join me, AJ. You've helped a lot of people with their health and their weight, but I know you have a much broader view of what's going on than just the few people you've interacted with. And, these people are very important, the ones you've interacted with and I've interacted with. And, we've got a world to save. So,
isn't it interesting that the diet that's making everyone fat and sick is also the same diet that's destroying the planet?
yeah. And they've been talking about it for tens of thousands of years. It's not like this is a new message. The Holy Bible, the Quran. I mean, all of our religious teachings of the past have taught us about the problems with, and they never imagined factory farming or killing 80 billion animals a year or having 8 billion people on the planet. When this concern was written, 5,000 years ago or 10,000 years ago or whenever the earliest writings were, now they didn't realize what a society we've been able to develop, which is an amazing society. It's too bad we can't save it, but we can. We can, but we're going to have to put a lot more effort into it than we are.
How would you like to be remembered, Dr. McDougall?
Well, one of the things that I said, and I will say every year or every time I give this talk, is I want my grandchildren to look back and not remember that Grandpa didn't try as hard as he could. And don't ask the question, Grandpa, why didn't you try harder? You left us with no world at all. Why didn't you try harder? So that's what I want to be remembered, is I tried as hard as I could. And I think every one of you has the same legacy you'd like to leave to your children and grandchildren, is that you tried as hard as you could to give them a planet they could live on, give them a world that was worthwhile. From what I understand of the universe, there are billions of galaxies appearing and disappearing, and there must be billions of lives out there appearing and disappearing. So our overall significance in the grand scheme of things, maybe not important in all of history, but it certainly is to us. And it certainly is to my 7 grandkids. And, so that's what I'm going to do, AJ. I'm just going to spend my time. They can drag me off the stage with a hook if they're tired of hearing it, but that's all I'm going to talk about, is that we have a personal responsibility to our children. And that personal responsibility begins with the next bite that you take. And if you refuse to eat animal foods, I don't mean particularly beef, I don't mean particularly fish, I mean all of them, then you are making a major contribution. And if you also have the wisdom to understand that planet friendly are things like rice and corn and potatoes, starches, and body friendly are those things too. And you're willing to spread this message by your personal appearance, which you do, AJ, and hopefully I do, and Mary does. You're willing to spread this message by your knowledge, which you do, and Mary does in her own way, and we have many other people. Then go on and do it. And I'm excited. I really am. There was a time there are still times when I become a bit despondent over this whole thing. But I can't stay in that mode more than a few seconds. And instead, I have to take another attitude is we're going to play this game. We're going to play it hard. We're going to win it. And it's not going to be easy.
Well, thank you for your contribution, Dr. McDougall, because to me, it seems like a no-brainer, because what we're asking people to eat to facilitate their optimal health and weight loss will also save the planet and contribute to animal welfare. So to me, it makes sense. You spent so many years helping people get healthy, reverse disease, and lose weight. So what would you say, Dr. McDougall, is the real truth about weight loss?
The real truth is you're being poisoned by the food system. It's not a problem of lack of exercise. It's not thinking bad thoughts. It's not some alien that's putting some radiation in your fat cells that's making them suck up calories from the air. It's the food. Plain and simple. If you eat a starch-based diet, what we're talking about is 90% of your diet coming from starch, preferably unrefined starch. With some fruits and vegetables, you avoid the extra oil and fats, you'll end up trim. Period. Always happens. Always will. You know, unless you're not telling the truth to yourself, which is okay. We have this ability to self lie. We're all really good at it.
I will always remember you for that. It's the food. It's the food. It's the food. Thank you so much, Dr. McDougall.
Well, thank you, AJ. Go out and spread the word.
Oh, we love you, Dr. McDougall. We know you're probably not listening live, but I love all the comments you guys made. I actually took screenshots and I'm going to email them to him, and I know it's going to make him feel very happy that you guys really love him too and appreciate him. Even though he used a big word, de novo lipogenesis, he explained that you really don't have to have a PhD in biochemistry to understand what the human body is meant to eat. And he talked about all the people that work at the McDougall program and how they're trim, and how if you eat this way, a starch-based, whole food, plant-based diet without oil, that you will be trim too, that it's never not worked. He's had, I don't know how many thousands and thousands of people go through his 10-day living program in Santa Rosa, California. And he said, if you eat starch, you'll be trim. If you eat a lot of fat, you're going to have problems. So it was interesting that he talked about the environment, because he wasn't afraid of that. We have another speaker coming up that's also going to talk about the environment, Walt Willits. So I'm really glad that people are starting to talk about this more and how important it is for the future of our children and grandchildren and our planet. But I just love the science about how carbohydrate shuts off the hunger drive. Fat doesn't. There's a speaker I've been trying to interview for years, and if anybody knows how to get in touch with her, her name is Dr. Susanna Holt, and she developed what's called the satiety index, different than the glycemic index, where she tested all these different foods on how satiating they were, how full we felt after eating them. And guess what food was number one? It was the humble spud, the potato. And she found that it was protein and carbohydrate that had good satiety, but that fat actually had very weak satiety. And if you watched the summit last year, you might remember Dr. Terry Shintani, who actually bought Dr. McDougall's medical practice in Hawaii when he moved to the mainland, who said the reason people say, oh, if I eat fat, I'm not as hungry, isn't because fat has any special magical satiating property, but because fat has a huge caloric density. It's 9 calories per gram, more than twice as calorically dense as protein or carbohydrate at 4 calories per gram. And he said that it is safe to eat a diet with no overt fats because you can't eat a fat-free diet. I mean, unless you're just, like he said, breast milk that is, commercial breast milk, not human breast milk. So you don't have to worry. Remember what Dr. Dina said yesterday, nuts, seeds, avocado, healthy, but if you're eating enough calories from starches and vegetables, you're going to probably meet all your need for these omega-3 fatty acids. If you're worried, to have a tablespoon of ground flax or get the blood test, but don't worry about it. He said that people cannot violate the laws of thermodynamics, and when people say, oh, if I eat starch, I get fat, well, then we need to study you, because it's never happened at anywhere in Santa Rosa where the person goes to McDougall program or True North where they're eating a low-fat, high-starch diet with fruits and vegetables. They've never not lost weight. So it's usually something else going on, because if starch made you fat, how do you account for the obesity rate among the Asians? 3%, and they eat white rice as their primary starch. Look at all the people that have had tremendous success eating nothing but potatoes for a year, and there's been many of them in the scientific literature. Probably the best known in the plant-based world is Andrew Spudfit Taylor, who lost 120 pounds eating nothing but potatoes in a year. I guess he didn't get the memo that potatoes make you fat. He mentioned that we do eat a lot more food than most people. I eat about 8 to 10 pounds a day. Robbie eats about 13, Cyrus 11. So you really have to understand calorie density and make sure that you are getting enough calories if you're going to do this effectively. He mentioned how the human body is just not efficient at turning carbohydrates to fat, but we're very efficient at turning fat to fat, which is why he's been saying for 50 years the fat you eat is the fat you wear. But most importantly, he said, and many of the speakers said this as well, unless you find a meal plan that provides you with satisfaction, you won't succeed. I know people have had success on keto and paleo diets, but really, how satisfying is it just eating a bunch of meat and fat all day and not having potatoes and rice and beans and fruits and excluding all these food groups that our ancestors ate throughout human history? So what will give you satisfaction is starch. Potatoes, rice, beans, corn, oats, sweet potatoes, all the winter squashes. And hopefully you will learn that starch is what makes you happy. It is the key to satiety. No starch, no satiety. And if you just try to eat fruits and vegetables, you will fail because you'll be too hungry. So we have lots of wonderful comments that we'd like to acknowledge. We have some honorable mentions from a couple of previous prize winners. Sherry Masser, who says, the fat you eat is the fat you wear. Yes, eat fat, stay fat. Eat green, stay lean. Want to march? Eat starch. I love it, Sherry. Thank you so much. Cindy McMahon says, a lot of people profit from being sick. Never heard it expressed in exactly that way. So true that they profit from our being sick, Cindy. So thank you for saying that. And I'm not going to be able to pronounce your name, but Gail Laurent, maybe Gail St. Laurent, I get it. Reading labels on the vegan treats are like commercial treats. Will surprise you. From Canada, absolutely. And Michelle Neese from Georgia says, Dr. McDougall is definitely one of the greats. This is a great talk. His line of soups are fantastic and go to when I don't get to batch prep for the week. When I batch prep, my favorites are Chef AJ's lentil stew and her magic cauliflower bisque. Magic because you throw everything in the Instant Pot hole and then stick blend afterwards. Delicious. Even non-vegans love it. Thank you for this inspiring conference. Thank you, Michelle. Pamela Morris Olson from Denver, Colorado says, Happy Valentine's Day. And I can't begin to tell you how grateful I am for this journey, whole food plant-based, that I started on January 25th of this year. Glad to happen upon this summit. It's been a blessing for me to learn all of the life-changing information at the beginning of my journey. Chef AJ, you're an inspiration, and I admire you for all your hard work, passion, and purpose to educate people to great health. Food is our medicine. Thank you, thank you, thank you, all the speakers, Chef AJ, Toby, and all that put this together. And thank you for listening, and we would love it if you share this with people, because maybe we can catch them at the start of their journey or before their journey so that they go down a path that's going to lead to their success. And Barbara Rawson has said, thanks, Chef AJ, for this amazing summit. During the course of this, I have removed coffee from my diet and have gone to bed at 10 each night. Well, I'm sure you're going to make Dr. Linda Carney very happy. I feel so emboldened by this summit. I wonder what else will be life transforming. Love it. I'm glad I bought the summit. I listened to Dr. Matiste on my 4-mile walk today. It's the perfect length of time to complete my walk. I can now listen to all these presenters over and over again during my walks to keep motivated for the day. And we thank you so much for purchasing the summit, and I hope that you give the buddy pass to somebody who really needs this. And when you purchase the summit, you allow us to continue our work. I don't think you guys realize that this takes almost a year to produce, and Toby does all the hard work behind the scenes. It's not just me spending an hour interviewing the speakers. I wish it were that simple. So we really appreciate it, and we agree. What we've learned from the Sharzais yesterday is we need that exercise every day, and it's so much easier when you have something really wonderful to watch or listen. And you might want to listen to this over and over so that you can get even more takeaways. And now for the prizes. Cindy Fosbeck James from Oregon is going to win 2 bottles of California balsamic vinegar in the flavors of her choice. And what she has said is, Dr. McDougall has it right. If you're not eating food that gives you satiety, you will not stay with it. He's not talking about only eating potatoes, but eating a balanced plant-based diet, including whole food starches. I love potatoes. I do too, Cindy. And if you follow me on social media, for Valentine's Day, I got a French fry cutter today. Boy, I love potatoes too. And so the California balsamic vinegars might be wonderful for you to dip your French fries in, especially if you choose a flavor like Sweet Heat or Blazing Habanero. And the winner of the Kathy Hester's 1-month cooking club is Randy Sue. She's from Nashville, Tennessee, and she says, I agree with Dr. McDougall that people don't want to talk about the impact of diet on the environment. I try to spread this message as often as possible. I passed out pamphlets at the chili cook-off at work a few weeks ago where I shared vegan chili, talking about the impact of food on climate change and our environment. I hope Dr. McDougall can be heard by the general public on this message because our lives depend upon it. And I'm sure that he will appreciate that comment because I'm taking screenshots and sending it to him. And Francine Kalinsky shared a comment, and she is going to win Local Spicery, which is wonderful spice blends. They make many, many salt-free spices. And her comment was, I was looking forward to hearing this brilliant doctor. Now I know why Chef AJ always talks about him. Loaded with great information, and it's funny that I purchased his book years ago. Yes to starches. Wish the medical doctors were more educated like him. Thank you for having him in his wonderful summit. I wish he was in Boca Raton, Florida. Well, I do too. And, there is a great doctor really near Boca Raton who was on the summit last year, Dr. Frank Sabatino. He's at Balance for Life if you want to hook up with a wonderful plant-based doctor that's been doing this about as long as Dr. McDougall. And when I wrote all the speakers, Dr. McDougall was the first one to get back to me and say yes. So we really appreciate his support of our summit and just all he has done to help people over the last 50 years. And for a $25 gift certificate to Tres Spa, some cruelty-free and vegan beauty products gifted to us by Janice Summers, Lori Herman says, I am so excited. I've never heard Dr. John McDougall speak before, listening live from Southern California. So I'm glad you're excited, and please share your excitement with all the people you can on your Facebook pages and whoever you know. We still have 2 full days left of the summit, 2.5. And so now we'll go on to a speaker who I learned about from Dr. McDougall because he had him at his conference, and he's going to talk about how to outsmart the instincts that make us overeat. Please welcome first timer to our summit, Dr. Stefan Guillenet.
Hi, Dr. Guillenet, and welcome to the Real Truth About Weight Loss Summit. Thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. Good to be here.
Yeah, I'm so excited to talk to you about the obesity epidemic. What is it, and why do we even have one?
Yeah, so body fatness has been increasing in the United States for probably at least a century, although that accelerated after the late 1970s. And I'm going to show you a little slide here that some people may be familiar with to illustrate this. Can you see that?
Absolutely.
Okay, so what you can see is that our body fatness prior to the 1970s was increasing relatively slowly. We have the prevalence of obesity on the vertical axis and the year on the horizontal axis. And what you can see is that it was increasing slowly, basically for a long time, probably for the better part of a century. But sometime in the 1970s, the increase accelerated. And that's what we call the obesity epidemic. So you can see that spike that starts between 1970 and 1980. We can see that in the prevalence of people with obesity and in the prevalence of people who are very obese. And so today in the United States, approximately 38% of adults have obesity. So that's what we call the obesity epidemic. Essentially, the prevalence of obesity is much higher today than human historical norms, basically. And this has profound impacts. So it has health impacts. Risk of diabetes is higher than it would otherwise be. We have more cardiovascular disease than we would otherwise have. Increased risk of certain cancers, of arthritis. Huge burden on the U.S. medical system, which everyone pays for, even people who do not have obesity. Healthcare in the United States we're spending about 19% of gross domestic product. So 19% of GDP on healthcare. The military is costing 3.2%, just to give you a sense of how enormous that is. So, and there's other harms that we don't talk about as much, but that are actually more important to most people. So physical appearance, self-esteem, love life, athletic performance, those are the things that people really care about probably more than their health. And this increase in body fatness that most people have experienced is impacting all of those things. And that really adds up to a lot. So the obesity epidemic basically is the large increase in obesity prevalence that's happened since the 1970s that has had profound impacts on American society and on affluent countries around the globe.
It's incredible. How did you get interested in this? You look like somebody who's very fit and trim to me.
Yeah, I mean, I've always had an interest in healthy eating and fitness, but really, I came at things from the perspective of neuroscience. So I have always been interested in neuroscience, and I did a PhD in neuroscience. And during that time, I wasn't studying obesity at the time, but I ended up wanting to move into an area that had greater relevance to a larger number of people than the disorders I was studying at the time. And I came to learn that the brain regulates body fatness. It regulates our appetite, and it regulates basically everything that feeds into the body fatness equation. And so it was a very natural fit for me, both due to my personal interests and my professional interests.
Nice. So you said before 1970, we had a very slow increase in how fat our country was becoming. So what caused it? Why the exponential rise since 1970?
Yeah, so the simple answer as to that explains why we're fatter than we used to be in the 1970s is that we eat more calories than we used to. That is the simple answer. And I'm going to show a slide on that as well, just to emphasize that we actually have pretty good data on this. What we can see on this slide is that by 3 different methods, our calorie intake is higher than it used to be in the United States, higher than it was in the 1970s. And I'm not going to get into the details of what those 3 different methods are, but suffice it to say that there's very good evidence that we're eating more calories than we used to, and the amount is really not trivial. So the most accurate measure we have, which is a measure that an estimate that was created by researcher Kevin Hall, suggests that we're eating about 218 calories every day more than we were in the mid-1970s. And that increase in calorie intake fully explains, or at least is able to fully explain, the increase in body fatness that we've seen. So that's the simple explanation. But why do we eat more than we used to?
That was my next question. Why are we eating 218 more calories a day, and where are they coming from?
Right, because we didn't just wake up one day and say, hey, I'm going to start eating more calories, right? So what is it about our food environment, or whatever else that caused us to eat more? Well, the first thing to note is that most of that increase in calorie intake appears to be because we snack more than we used to. So between meal snacking accounts for the majority of that increase in calories. So it's not exclusively that we're eating more at actual meals when we sit down. It's more that we're eating more between meals. And as I said before, I'm a neuroscientist by training, so I come at this from the perspective of the brain. But the brain turns out to be a rather useful perspective for understanding why we eat more. We have obesity because of our eating behaviors, because our behaviors cause us to eat more calories than we used to. And eating behaviors, like all behaviors, are generated by the brain. There's no other organ in the body that generates behaviors, including how much we eat, what types of foods we eat. So understanding how the brain works and how the brain pushes us to overeat in certain contexts, I think, is a really fruitful thing to do. So why are our brains pushing us to eat too much today when they weren't doing that as much historically? This is a pretty odd thing, right? I mean, if you step back and think about it, no one wants to overeat. No one wants to gain fat and, possibly eventually become sick. And yet most of us do that anyway. So what drives our own behavior to undermine our own best intentions for ourselves? That's a pretty odd thing, right? And I think the basic reason for this is that we're experiencing a clash between ancient hardwired survival circuits in the brain and the modern food environment. Basically, the modern food environment is sending our brains the wrong signals. So these brain circuits that I referred to are mostly operating outside our conscious awareness and regulating things like hunger and fullness and cravings and body fatness. And they evolved to help our ancestors survive and reproduce. But again, the modern world is sending those signals, is sending those circuits the wrong signals. One thing I want people to understand that's very important to grasping this concept is that most of our brain activity operates outside of our conscious awareness. So there are brain circuits that regulate our heartbeat, that regulate our breathing when we're not paying attention to it, that regulate our blood pressure and our digestion and body temperature and all of those things. And things like hunger and cravings are also processes that are generated non-consciously by the brain. So you don't choose to feel hungry, right? You don't choose to feel a craving. Those are things that are generated by your brain that well up, and then we become aware of them, and then those influence our eating behaviors. And they do that in large part to the signals that the brain is receiving from both inside and outside the body, in large part as a result of the types of foods we're eating and the type of food environment that we live in. So to give you a simple example, if you walk past a pizzeria and smell pizza, that's a cue to certain non-conscious parts of your brain that may instinctively make you crave pizza and make you feel hungry. At that point, it may be hard for you not to stop and go into that pizzeria and overeat pizza. But if you hadn't walked past the pizzeria, and if you hadn't been able to smell the smell of pizza, you wouldn't have done that. So that's an example of how the cues that your brain is experiencing, for example, via sensory channels like smell and sight, impact those non-conscious brain regions that determine our eating drive. So that's just one example, and there are others that we'll go through.
Well, it makes sense because we weren't designed to eat the kind of food that we're eating 218 more calories per day of. These are processed foods, I would imagine, snack foods.
Yeah, exactly. To a large extent. So basically, there have been changes to the food itself, and there have been changes to the food environment that surround us. And so in other words, how those foods are presented, how often we receive those sensory cues like the sight and smell of food. And I'll get to that. So the basic reason that this happens is that the non-conscious parts of our brains that regulate things like hunger and cravings and body fatness evolved in the time of our distant ancestors to support survival and reproduction in that ancient context. And that context was that food was a lot harder to get, and it was a lot simpler and less refined than it is today. Our brains are calibrated for a time when there was no pizza, there were no cookies, there were no French fries, when food was more scarce, required a lot more work, and was a lot simpler than it is today. So basically, modern foods and the abundant food environment drive our brains crazy. They push our buttons and push us to overconsume, even though we don't really, on some level, we don't even want to do that. We don't want to overconsume, but we have these circuits that are always pushing us to overconsume. So our brains are not, this is another thing I want people to understand. Our brains are not malfunctioning when they push us to overeat. And it's not some kind of moral failure. Your brain is doing exactly what it's designed to do when it pushes you to overeat. The problem is that we have a mismatch between the way our brains are designed and the types of modern foods that we eat and the type of modern food environment that we live in. So, and we can break this down into several different mismatches, basically, between brain systems and the way we live today. I'm only going to talk about a couple of them today. I talk about them more extensively in my book, The Hungry Brain. But the first thing I want to talk about is something called food reward. This is basically the seductiveness of foods, how much they call to us. For example, ice cream is a lot more seductive than plain celery sticks for most people. And why is this? I mean, why? It's obvious to us, right? Intuitively, that some foods are a lot more seductive than others. But why is that? Well, it turns out that it relates to specific physical and chemical properties of those foods. We have a pretty good idea of what it is about foods that makes some foods seductive and some foods not seductive. And the reason is that our brains are hardwired to respond to certain food properties by releasing a chemical called dopamine that stimulates our cravings and eating drive. So the digestive tract contains receptors that detect sugar and starch and fat and protein and salt, and it sends signals to the brain when it detects those things. And the more of those substances there are in a food, up to a point, the more dopamine release occurs in the brain, and the more that food increases your drive to eat it. So in other words, you eat the food and your drive to eat it increases both in that eating occasion and the next time you encounter the food. And this is particularly true when you combine these substances together, like fat and sugar in ice cream or fat, starch, and salt in French fries. Our distant ancestors did not have these foods, and our brains aren't really adapted to them. They cause so much dopamine release that they drive our brains crazy, creating cravings that can be hard to control. But again, our brains are just doing what they were wired to do. This is not a malfunction. They're supposed to release dopamine when we eat food. The problem is that our modern foods, the way that they're very concentrated in these substances and combine these substances together, they just cause too much dopamine release in our brains, and that leads to an excessive motivational drive to consume food that we find very hard to control. So that's one of the reasons, food reward or seductiveness. And another reason that causes a lot of us to overeat is that modern foods are not very filling per unit calorie. In other words, again, because of their physical and chemical properties, we have to eat more calories of these foods before we experience that sensation of fullness that tells us to terminate a meal. And this was best illustrated by a study published by Susanna Holt and her colleagues in 1995. They fed people equal calorie portions of 38 common foods, and they simply measured how full people were for the next 2 hours. And as it turns out, some foods were much more filling than others. And I'm going to show you a slide that illustrates that.
I love this because I am familiar with her work, and I love how the number one food in terms of satiety is my favorite food.
Cool. So the first thing I'll point out is that some foods were much more filling than others per unit calorie. The least filling food of all, which you can see on the left, is croissants. The most filling food that they tested per unit calorie on the right is potatoes. And basically these foods broke out into two different categories. And this isn't all the foods they tested, but this is just a representative sample. But they basically can be divided into two categories. They can be divided into calorie-dense processed foods that cause very little fullness per calorie, and those are on the left, and unrefined, lower calorie density, more simple foods, more simple natural foods like those on the right that cause more fullness per unit calorie. So those on the left you can see are like baked goods and candy and white flour foods. And then on the right we have unrefined grains, we have potatoes, we have beans, we have fruit, we have meats and fish. These are the types of foods that create a lot more fullness per calorie. And this is not even something we necessarily notice because we just sit down and eat till we're full, right? That's how most people interact with food at a meal. You sit down, you start eating, and you stop when you feel full. But in fact, depending on which foods you're eating, you can eat a lot more calories or a lot fewer calories before you reach that point of fullness that stops your meal, but you won't even know it. You won't even realize that you consumed twice as many calories eating pizza as you would have if you had eaten, beans and potatoes and a piece of fruit. So that's something I consider it a really valuable tool, because basically you can reduce your calorie intake and your waistline without causing yourself to go hungry at every meal. So they went further than just figuring out which foods are more filling than others. What they did was they actually identified the specific properties of those foods that caused them to be more filling or less filling. And what they found is that the most important things were 4 different properties. First of all was calorie density. I know you had a conversation with Barbara Rolls. She's a researcher who focuses a lot on calorie density. And what that is the number of calories in a food per gram, or it can be expressed per volume. Basically, more calories in a given weight or volume of food. And what that means is that very calorie dense foods don't stretch your stomach as much per calorie that you eat. So you can eat 100 calories of crackers, for example, and that's not going to fill up your stomach very much. Whereas if you ate 100 calories of oatmeal, which is mostly water and also has a lot of fiber, that's going to be a much larger volume in your stomach. And so up to a point, lower calorie density foods are actually more filling per calorie, probably in large part because they just take up more space in your stomach. The second thing is palatability, or how good a food tastes. So the more delicious a food was, the less filling it was per calorie. And I think we've had experiences like this where, most of us, where we're sitting at the table and we're eating something really delicious and it's like we can't stop. It's just so good. I want to keep eating it. So the more delicious, the less filling. And then the amount of protein was also related to fullness. So higher protein foods were more filling than lower protein foods. And then similarly, higher fiber foods were more filling than lower fiber foods. And if you look at foods that basically score poorly on all 4 of these metrics, calorie density, palatability, protein, fiber, you're basically describing junk food that most of us intuitively understand is pretty fattening, like white bread and pizza, French fries, ice cream, candy bars, etc. Whereas foods that score well on those 4 metrics, you're looking at whole, unrefined, lower calorie density foods, things like potatoes and fruit and beans and eggs, that most people would view as more slimming. So basically, our diet over, decades and decades has moved more toward seductive, lower satiety foods. So in other words, foods that are more, that draw us in more, that motivate us more, but fill us up less. And that's part of why we overeat. And we can see that very clearly if we look at the top 6 sources of calories in the US diet, which I'm showing here.
Wow.
Yeah, this is really extraordinary. So the number 1 source of calories in the US diet is grain-based desserts. So this is things like brownies and cakes and donuts and that sort of thing. At least as of the early 2000s, this is what was the case. Number 2 is bread. Of course, most of that is white flour bread. Bread is actually surprisingly dense, calorie dense. Most people don't realize that, but it seems fluffy, but once you chew it, the air goes away, and it's actually quite calorie dense. Chicken dishes, a lot of that was fried chicken, chicken nuggets. Number 4, I call sugar water. We're talking about soda and, energy drinks and that sort of thing. Number 5, pizza, of course. And number 6, alcoholic beverages. So, this is the American diet of the 21st century. And it's, if we look at that, I don't think it's really hard to understand why we have an obesity epidemic. And I think you can also see where I'm coming from with some of the principles that I've been talking about with high seductiveness and low satiety value.
Wow. I don't eat anything on that list.
Well, I sometimes have most of the things on that list, but I limit it quite a bit. Yeah. So another thing I want to mention too, I'm not going to discuss this a lot because it's kind of a can of worms, but um, another problem that we experience is that once we gain fat, it's very hard to lose that fat. And that's because of how our brains are designed, the fat regulating circuits in our brain. Basically, once you gain that fat, your brain wants you to hang on to it, and it will literally obstruct your efforts to lose weight and maintain weight loss. So it'll ramp up your hunger, it'll ramp up your cravings, it'll slow your metabolism, etc. And so, again, this is just how our brains are designed, but this is one of the primary things that undermines weight loss attempts. People start losing weight, they like what's happening, they feel good, and then suddenly the hunger kicks in and the cravings kick in, and they're finding it really hard to sustain those changes they made. So, this is another issue that relates to these non-conscious brain circuits that makes it difficult once someone has gained that fat to lose it. That doesn't mean it's impossible to lose the fat, but it is an additional barrier to losing that fat that I think, first of all, people need to understand what they're up against. And second of all, I think it helps people have some compassion for themselves. If they had a weight loss attempt that didn't go as well as they wanted it to, there are substantial barriers to substantial and sustained weight loss. So don't be too hard on yourself.
Do you think, Dr. Guillenette, that part of the problem is that, at least for some people, these foods are highly addictive? It's interesting because you mentioned that you eat some of those foods on the list of 6, but you limit them. I found for myself, as someone who used to be obese, weighing almost 200 pounds, that I can't have any of those foods.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it really depends on the type of person that you are. And I'm not someone who works directly with clients, so all I can say is what I see in the scientific literature and talking to other people who do work with clients and individuals. I tend to believe that there are 2 types of people. There are people who need to do the cold turkey approach, just not mess with those foods at all, because if you start to trigger that dopamine again, it's like an avalanche and you can't control it, or it would be very difficult to control it. And then there are other types of people who do really well with the moderation approach. Basically, for that type of person, it's easier for them to not cut those foods out completely because it helps them feel less deprived with their diet. So, and I don't think that there's one size fits all approach, but I think probably most people know what type of person they are already.
Right. It just seems like those foods that were on the list of 6, those foods our ancestors didn't even have to deal with. They didn't exist up until recently in the timeline of human history, and they combined things that were never combined in nature. For example, sugar, fat, and salt never appeared together in nature, and now that's all we have in these processed foods.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, it's no accident that that's the perfect recipe for pushing our dopamine buttons. I mean, those foods literally were designed to taste as good as possible, right? And sometimes they were designed just over time in our own kitchens, chefs trying out recipes, etc. And sometimes they were designed industrially and, by people who have very scientific processes for figuring out what the optimal amount of sugar or salt or fat is in a particular food to make it sell as much as possible. I don't think anyone intended to make us fat, but that is an unfortunate unintended consequence of making foods that are as marketable as possible.
They maybe didn't intend to make us fat, but I think they did intend to make a profit.
Absolutely. They intended to get us to buy their foods, and an unfortunate side effect is that we end up eating too much of it.
So what should we eat to control our weight?
Yeah, so ultimately weight control comes down to calorie intake. However, you can control, technically you can control your calorie intake and your weight eating any kind of food, even foods that we consider to be fattening and unhealthy. However, it will be a lot easier to control your calorie intake and your weight if you're eating foods that are conducive to that. So, some foods naturally lead to a higher calorie intake and higher body fatness, and some foods naturally lead to a lower calorie intake and lower body fatness. And I think choosing a diet that's composed of those foods and choosing a supportive food environment for most people is going to be a more effective and sustainable path than continuing to eat a calorie dense refined diet and just trying to eat less of it. And so there are certain principles that I tend to focus on when I'm thinking about how to design a diet like this. The first one is eat foods that are minimally processed. So we want foods that have their natural complement of water and fiber and other healthful components. So again, think about a bowl of oatmeal versus a handful of crackers, same number of calories, but one is a lot more filling than the other. Think about fresh fruit versus dried fruit. Even though the dried fruit might have most of the nutrients that the fresh fruit has, you're likely to eat a lot more of it due to the calorie density. And then, of course, when we talk about white flour, added fats, added sugars that we use in cooking, those are things that are very calorie dense that increase the palatability or deliciousness of food and cause us to overconsume. So basically, you want to limit anything that's not a whole, fresh, unrefined food. So you're limiting things like added fats, sugars, flours, most processed foods. Not to say that all processing is necessarily bad, but a lot of it is. So that's the first principle, is minimally processed. Second principle is you don't want the foods to be too palatable. You don't want it to be too delicious, because that's another thing. And I know this is not something anybody likes to hear.
Well, it's funny because I don't know if you notice I'm a professional chef, and I'm laughing because that's how you get hired.
I know.
They don't want to hire a chef that makes food that doesn't taste good.
I know. I've been joking that I should publish a bland food cookbook. But yeah, no, I know exactly. It's not something that anyone wants to hear, but that's the truth, is that the more delicious the food is, the more of it we're likely to eat. So I'm not saying don't eat food. You don't want your meal to be unsatisfying. It's got to be satisfying. But what I'd like to tell people is try to focus on foods that are just, high. You're focusing on the simple flavors of high quality foods. You're not dressing it up with a bunch of other things, a bunch of added fats and sugars and flavorings. You're just focusing on the simple flavors of high quality, unrefined foods.
Right. And I actually agree with you. And that's how I eat. I was just laughing, as a chef, but some of the other doctors that we've interviewed on the summit have said the same thing. The more you salt the food, the more you spice the food, the more hyper palatable it becomes, the more you're going to eat. And there's certain foods, like for instance, a sweet potato or a Japanese sweet potato or Hawaiian sweet potato, that really need nothing added to it. And they're delicious.
Absolutely. I agree. And, I'm a big gardener. I grow a lot of my own food, and I specifically try to grow varieties that are tasty enough that I don't need to put anything on them. So for example, the winter squash that I grow, the varieties that I grow are so delicious. I literally just bake them and eat them plain. And that's the way that I prefer it, because I think it's healthier that way. So another thing is to moderate the calorie density of your diet. So you can't take this to too much of an extreme. I mean, obviously your stomach knows if you're just, you're not going to be satisfied with a belly full of lettuce. So you can't drop your calorie density down too much. You have to still be eating enough calories to be satisfied. But if you avoid those very calorie dense things that are not very filling per unit calorie, and this goes hand in hand with avoiding the highly processed and refined foods, you're going to get more fullness per unit calorie. So, and then the fourth thing is to eat more protein. And by the way, I want to say that none of these things are indispensable. You can implement some of them, you can implement all of them, but all of them are tools that you can have in your toolbox. So by eating higher protein, you'll get more fullness per unit calorie. You'll tend to lose less muscle mass as you lose weight, and it tends to support your body's metabolic rate as you lose weight as well. So again, the four things I mentioned are minimally processed food, not too palatable, moderate calorie density, and higher in protein.
I find that's very good advice. I know that you spoke at one of my mentors' conferences, Dr. John McDougall. As a matter of fact, that's how I first heard about you and heard you speak, and why I wanted to have you on the summit. And I follow his approach of a no added fat diet. And I find with that, I can eat as much as I want just by not adding fats to my food. And for me, that really works because I'm what you call a volume eater, and I like to eat large quantities of delicious food. But the minute I add in any fat, weight goes up.
Yeah, I believe it. I think a lot of people don't realize how many calories they're eating as added fat. I mean, 1 tablespoon of added fat, if you visualize what a tablespoon looks like, it's not a lot of volume, right? I mean, if you think about the proportion of the amount of food on your plate that 1 tablespoon represents, that's 120 calories, just 1 tablespoon. And 1 teaspoon is 40 calories. So, I mean, and again, the excess amount that we're eating is 218 additional calories versus 1975. So that's, we're talking about less than 2 tablespoons of fat would make the difference between what we were eating then and what we're eating now in terms of calories. So, and by the way, our increased calorie intake is not fully accounted for by increased fat intake, but that is part of the explanation. We are adding more fat to our food. And so I think it's very, very pertinent.
And you had mentioned Dr. Susanna Holt. If I'm saying her work correctly, she said that fat is the least satiating of all the macronutrients. The protein and carbohydrate are much more satiating. So fat doesn't necessarily fill us up the way that the protein and the carbohydrate does.
Yeah, that can be true, but it depends on the context. So essentially, as I mentioned before, calorie density is one of the main determinants of how filling things are. And fat is the most calorie dense substance in the diet. So it has 9 calories per gram, whereas carbohydrate and protein have 4 calories per gram. So if you're just, if you're not controlling for calorie density, then yes, it is less filling. So for example, if you want to add calories to your food while experiencing as little additional fullness as possible, putting fat on your food is an effective way to do that. But if you control for calorie density, for example, if you are serving meals that have different amounts of carbohydrate and fat, but the overall calorie density of the meal is the same, what you see is per calorie, you get approximately the same amount of fullness. So if you hold calorie density constant, it's actually the same as carbohydrate. Yet it can be very easy if you're using added fats where they have a very high calorie density. It can be very easy to increase calories without increasing fullness very much.
Terrific. You mentioned choosing a supportive food environment. Could you elaborate on what you meant by that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think this is one of the most important things that people should be focusing on to push their eating behavior in the right direction with less effort required. So essentially, your food environment is all the foods and food cues that surround you over the course of your day. So for example, if you have chips sitting out on the counter, that's a food and a food cue. If you see advertisements on TV, that's a food cue. The average American adult sees 20 food ads per day on television alone. Teenagers see 16. And if you're at work and someone pulls out donuts in a meeting, that's part of your food environment. The lunch that you brought for yourself, all of those things are part of your food environment. And essentially, the way that our brains work is that our drive to eat is triggered in large part by these environmental signals. So, we talked earlier about smelling pizza as you walk past a pizzeria. That is a sensory trigger for your eating drive. The sight of foods can do that as well. So if you see, donuts or ice cream, let's say you open your freezer and your eyes, alight on a quart of ice cream that you didn't remember was sitting in there. All of a sudden, you might have an urge to eat that. It's not, you haven't tasted it. There's nothing happening physiologically in your body that's driving you toward that. It's just that cue. It's the sensory cue that's reminding your brain, oh, hey, there's a really delicious food that's right there. I could be eating that right now. And so essentially, what that means is that if you are living a life where you're surrounded by unsupportive food cues, that is to say, food cues that are not helping you reach your goal for yourself, it's going to make it a lot harder for you to eat the way you want to eat. So if you're seeing food ads on television, if you're surrounded by foods at home and at work that are tempting you all the time, you're going to have to be fighting yourself and exerting willpower all the time to eat the way that you want to eat. And the truth is that most of us are not heroes. Like, we can't sustain that all the time. We're going to give in more than we would like, and possibly on a regular basis. So the better way is to step back and to exert a little willpower before you're in that situation and design your food environment in a better way so that it supports you instead of undermines you. So essentially what you want to do is you want to design an environment that's, first of all, not constantly feeding you food cues. You don't want to have visible food around your home and your workplace. You don't want to even have the most tempting things. You don't even want to have them in your home at all, because on some level your brain knows it's there. And then you want to control your food cue exposures, like on television. Can you flip the channel when a food ad comes on, or just, watch less television, maybe listen to the radio more or something like that. So the second thing you want to do is create small effort barriers for yourself for the food that is in your house. So, as opposed to having an open bowl of nuts that have been shelled, salted, let's say salted nuts that have been shelled, can you have a bag of unsalted in-shell nuts? So every time you want to eat nuts, you have to crack the nuts. Or, instead of dried fruit, you have whole oranges. So if you're hungry, you can eat an orange, but you have to peel it. That's a little effort barrier. And so it means that you won't actually do it unless you're actually hungry. Same with the nuts. And so those are just some ways to create little effort barriers. And the third thing is to not have the foods in your environment be too seductive. You want to avoid exposing yourself to cues that remind your brain of these really delicious foods all the time. So those are the three principles. 1, limit food cues. 2, create small effort barriers. And 3, limit the seductiveness of foods in your environment.
Thank you. So many of the experts on this summit agree that the environment really is a huge predictor of someone's success. I always said, if it's in your house, it's in your mouth. And so one of my secrets to being able to maintain my weight loss is to not have any food that's tempting in my house, and also not to watch television. But I guess that won't work for everyone. That's
interesting. So you just totally cut out TV as part of your strategy?
Yes. I mean, I do watch things on Amazon Prime and Netflix, but it's been 10 months now. I haven't seen a television commercial.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure that's helpful.
Yeah. I mean, because I remember Lay's, bet you can't eat just one. That's true.
And now suddenly you want Lay's. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I wonder why.
So I think I'm one of these people that are very vulnerable to these cues. And, I always feel like I don't have to execute willpower to not eat something that's not in my house. So I never have to make those decisions.
It's just so much easier.
It really is. It really is. Thank you for saying that. So other than what you just talked about with the environment, is there anything else we should be focusing on other than the environment or the food to help with this obesity epidemic?
Absolutely. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these. I'll just touch on them briefly. But I think regular physical activity is helpful. Some people may benefit from stress management. And some people may benefit from getting more and higher quality sleep. Those are all things that evidence suggests are potential influences on our food intake.
So you mentioned exercise, and I'm curious because you said about 218 more calories per day are being eaten. Couldn't we just up our exercise to burn 200 calories more a day and we'll be fine?
To some extent, it would help. Let me put it that way. It wouldn't necessarily be a complete cure, but it would help. Yeah, and this is something that I think there's a lot of conflicting information about in media, because we have all these reports coming out and all these news articles suggesting that physical activity is not effective for regulating body weight, for losing weight or maintaining it. And some of these articles are written by well-respected people, but I respectfully disagree with that perspective. I think part of the issue is that a lot of the studies that have been done haven't monitored or enforced physical activity. So basically, they just tell people, hey, exercise more, and then send them home. And then they're not really making sure that they're actually exercising more. And the truth is, just like with diet interventions, a lot of people just don't follow the advice very well. So if you look at specifically at studies that where people were coming into the research facility and exercising on a regular basis while researchers were observing them to be certain that the exercise was happening and how much of it was happening, what you see is that in those interventions, you do see weight and fat loss, and sometimes it can be pretty substantial. And you see that the amount of fat loss is proportional to the amount of physical activity. So more physical activity equals more fat loss. That said, another thing you see is that the amount of weight and fat loss that people experience is less than you would predict based on the number of calories that they're burning. So if a person is burning an extra 500 calories a day, you see weight loss on average that corresponds to, as if they were burning 200 calories a day. So why is that? Well, the reason, not surprisingly, is that people eat more when their physical activity goes up, at least on average. There's a lot of variability, but on average, people will partially compensate for the calories they burn by having a greater appetite and eating more. But on average, they are not fully compensating. So they're not eating enough calories to make up for the calories they burned, and therefore they are losing weight and fat. But again, that's on average. And actually, there seems to be a lot of individual variability here. So most people will lose some amount of fat when they exercise. And by the way, it's also just really, really healthy. Some people will lose a moderate amount of fat. Some people will lose a ton of fat, and their calorie intake actually goes down the more they exercise. So they lose a ton of fat. I know people like this. And then there are other people. I also know people like this. It's not common, but there are people like this who actually gain fat when they start to increase their physical activity level. So their appetite overcompensates. They're actually overeating, even factoring in the extra exercise. And so this is why, if we just burned off an extra 218 calories a day, this is why it wouldn't bring us back to where we were in 1975. Because if we just exercise for an extra 218 calories a day, we would probably eat more as well. And so only part of that change in energy balance would actually materialize as a loss of body fat. So that's the deal with exercise. I think it is helpful for weight loss. Diet is the primary and most effective lever, but exercise can be helpful too. And it also seems to be important for weight gain prevention and weight loss maintenance. So after you lose the weight, maintaining. We see for sure that people who lose weight and exercise a lot after they lost weight tend to maintain that weight loss a lot better than people who don't have a regular physical activity program.
Right. I couldn't agree with you more. I didn't really start exercising until actually after I lost weight. And I just think that when you exercise, it just makes it easier to stick to a healthy eating plan. It just does something for your brain or your self-esteem that, I get up every morning, I spin for an hour. That's when I watch my Netflix. And then I don't want to blow it by eating junk food.
That's interesting. That's a good attitude. I think, unfortunately, a lot of people will have the opposite attitude where it's like, oh, I earned this, XYZ because I exercised. I think that's a particularly self-defeating piece of psychology that some people have to deal with.
Interesting. So did everybody increase their caloric intake in 1975 by 218 calories, but just some people became overweight? So why is it that some people just weigh more than other people, regardless of what they're eating?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the truth is that that's the average. So no, we did not all increase our calorie intake. Some of us increased our calorie intake a bunch. Some of us didn't increase it at all. And then some people were in the middle. And obviously, the people who increased it a bunch are the ones who gained the most weight. And you saw in that graph that I showed you, the first one, there was a trend line for obesity, and there was a trend line for people who are very obese, which is body mass index of 40 or higher. And there's been something like a tenfold increase in extreme obesity. So yeah, it's the basically the distribution is spread out over time, and a lot of this has to do with individual differences that boil down to genetics. So different people respond differently. Different people have responded differently to the change in our food and our food environment that has happened over the last half century or the last century. So we have a ton of genetics research happening right now on obesity. And what that research suggests is that about 70% of the differences in body fatness between people can be explained by genetic differences. And so this is something that I think is helpful for people to understand, because, some people, they like to feel really smug because they're lean, or other people will feel bad because they're heavier and feel like they're, making poor choices. A lot of it, honestly, is genetics. That doesn't mean you can't affect it by diet and lifestyle, but certain people have certain susceptibilities from the beginning that make them more susceptible to the harmful effects of our current environment. And that happens across a variety of different things: cardiovascular disease, diabetes, body fatness, almost anything you can think of, it's the same way.
Many of the speakers I've interviewed are familiar with the phrase that genetics only loads the gun, but it's your diet and lifestyle that pulls the trigger.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because a lot of times when people hear that genetics is so important, they will say, oh, well, how could that be possible, since, there's so much more obesity now than we used to have? Obviously, the cause is environmental, not genetic. And yeah, that's absolutely true. The reason that we're fatter today than we were 50 years ago is not because our genes have changed, but it's because of how our genes interact with how our environment has changed. And some of us have genes such that in the modern food environment, they're not, those people are not going to get fat no matter what. They can eat anything. I mean, probably most of us know people like this. They become less and less common as we get older, but there are people who can eat basically anything and they'll never become fat. There are other people who can even follow a very healthy diet diligently, and then they may still carry some excess fat. So there's different, we get dealt a different hand. Everybody gets dealt a different hand genetically that makes us more or less susceptible.
I'm married to one of those people, by the way, that can do anything and be thin. I'm Jack's, and I'm the opposite. It's very annoying when you know those people.
I'm sure it's very annoying. Yeah. And, the not only do we know that it's very genetic, but we know a lot about what systems those genetics are affecting. So we know that primarily the gene variants that make some people tend to be fatter than others are being expressed in the brain. So the genetics of obesity is all about brain activity. So basically, some people have brains because of their genes. Their brains are wired in a certain way that makes them have a greater eating drive, that makes their bodies want to hold on to fat and not give it up. And those are primarily the types of differences that we see between people who are leaner and people who are heavier. And this is one of the reasons why I think that neuroscience perspective is so valuable, because really obesity does seem to be really revolve around brain activity, and particularly the eating behaviors that brain activity generates.
That's incredible. So in the last 50 years, we've increased our caloric intake and we've also gotten fatter. So is this going to level off, or are we going to just keep increasing our caloric intake for the next 50 years and keep getting fatter? What do you see as the prognosis for this obesity epidemic?
Yeah, that's a good question. I really don't know. I think that we are going to see new tools coming online for managing obesity. I know that in the research community, there's a lot of work happening on obesity drugs. So we're gaining a better understanding of the biology underlying obesity, and we're getting better tools. But we're not really fixing the food environment. We're not really turning off the tap that's causing this to happen in the first place. And so I think in the long run, we're going to find ways to beat obesity, but I don't think anybody wants to live in a world where we, are all chronically medicated to prevent the fat gain that's caused by our diet and lifestyle. So I would really like to see us place greater emphasis on tackling the diet and lifestyle aspect of it.
Absolutely. So many people watching this summit, Dr. Guillenette, have given up hope. They've dieted their whole lives only to gain the weight back and then some. What would you say to somebody who's given up hope that they could ever lose weight?
Yeah. So first of all, some people may just not have found the right strategy yet. So a lot of people, they just need to try something different. I get emails from people all the time who say something like, Stefan, I'm thankful for your writing because I was stuck in this particular dietary ideology and I thought that obesity was all about X. And through your writing, I saw that it was more complex than that. And I tried a different approach and that worked for me better than the one that I was following. So I think sometimes people will be stuck in a particular way of thinking about dieting or weight loss, and they'll think that's the one true way. And that's just not the best way for them. Maybe that is the best way for someone else, but it's not the best way for them. And we don't have a way yet to really know which diet is best for which individual. We can't do that yet with the genetics. We don't have any kind of biomarker. The only thing we have right now is experimentation. And there are some places, some good starting points for most people, but sometimes people need to play around a little bit to figure out what works best for them. The second thing I'll say is just to reiterate the thing we were talking about the food environment. No matter what your strategy is, if you create a supportive food environment, that's going to help support you in achieving your goals for yourself. And the third thing that I'll mention is that the whole point of losing weight is to have a better life, right? I mean, that's what people are seeking when they try to lose weight. And so, if you're someone who's tried everything and you're just making yourself miserable, maybe you should just focus on being as healthy as possible and not try to lose weight anymore. And, just eat a healthy diet, get plenty of physical activity and enjoy yourself. I mean, ultimately, if you really have tried everything and it's just making you miserable, then maybe you should consider that.
Well, I'm not going to give up hope for anybody watching the summit. So, Dr. Guillenette, what is the real truth about weight loss?
The real truth is that calories do matter, but focusing on calories per se isn't necessarily the best strategy for most people. I think the best strategy for most people is to design a diet and a food environment that naturally pushes you toward eating an appropriate number of calories per day, yet leaves you satisfied rather than feeling starving.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Guillenette.
Thank you.
I have so many takeaways from this lecture that I could probably talk for an hour on my takeaways. His book, The Hungry Brain, I must be hungry because I have some rice cooking, goes into more detail about this. But I love how he said the whole point to losing weight is to have a better life. And that's what we want from you. That's why this is brought to you by Better Life Summits. You know, he talked about how in 1970 to about 1980, this is when we really saw a rise in the obesity of our population, and now we're at 38%. That's it's going to get to 50, guys. That's what I've been reading. And he's talked about how having excess body fat impacts more than your health. We certainly learned that it does impact your predisposition to all these diseases, from Alzheimer's to cancer to heart disease to diabetes to autoimmune disease. But he says it impacts our self-esteem. It affects our appearance. And believe it or not, many people care more about that than even their health. It's mind-blowing that we eat 218 calories more now than we did in the 1970s. And he said it's not because we're eating more at meals, it's because we're snacking more between meals. And listen to what doctors like Dr. Furman and all the other doctors that are telling you about intermittent fasting. We don't need to be eating from the minute we wake up till the minute we go to bed. He really understands a lot of what the other speakers, not a lot, all of what the other speakers are teaching. He totally understands Barbara Rolls' work with calorie density and the pleasure trap that Dr. Lyle and Dr. Goldhammer, two of our other speakers, talk about, because he said the brain pushes us to overeat, that there's a clash between the ancient hardwiring of our brain circuits, which operate outside our awareness, that evolved to help us survive and reproduce. But these were not meant for the modern food environment, and that's why creating your own food environment is so important. He talked about that many times. Our brains were designed for an environment of scarcity, and we don't live in that environment anymore. He talked about the seductiveness of certain foods like ice cream versus celery and how much they call to us. But you have to understand that our ancestors didn't have these foods in their environment, and so their brains weren't driven crazy by them. The modern foods cause too much dopamine to be produced in our brain, and it leads to an obsessive drive to keep consuming these foods, which is why for a lot of people watching television commercials can be really difficult, but especially having them in your house. That's why I've been saying if it's in your house, it's in your mouth. He said these modern foods, these hyperpalatable hedonic foods, they're not very filling, and so we have to overeat on them to feel fullness, which he describes as fullness per calorie. And by the time we've overconsumed calories, well, that's those 218 calories. That's about 4 teaspoons of oil, about 240 calories per teaspoon, he said. 218 calories, that's less than 2 tablespoons of oil that we're overeating by a day. And if you're eating at restaurants or eating processed food, you're certainly getting those extra 218 calories. He mentioned Dr. Susanna Holt, who created the satiety index, and again reiterated the most filling food there is the potato. He talks about how filling a food is by unit calorie. And the only way that I know of, and that many of the experts know of, to reduce our calories without going hungry is to employ the principles of calorie density. And he talked about how that's one of the most of all the properties of food that make it possible for us to lose weight, like protein, fiber, palatability. Calorie density certainly is one of us. He says that calorically dense food draws us in more, but it fills us up less, and that Americans are eating these foods in order, foods that I haven't eaten in almost 20 years. Grain-based desserts like cakes and cookies, bread, chicken dishes, soda and energy drinks, which he called sugar water, pizza, and alcoholic beverages. They have high seductiveness but low satiety. And he echoed what Dr. Sylvia Tara said in the beginning of the summit, that once we gain fat, it's very hard to lose because our brain wants to hang out with it. I don't think it wants to hang out with it, but it definitely wants to hang on to it. And, once we start to trigger that dopamine, for many of us, it's like an avalanche. Weight control comes down to calorie intake, but we can do this with any kind of diet, but it's so much easier when we do it, when we eat foods that are conducive to that. So sure, people go on these strict weighing and measuring programs, and they eat 7 ounces of vegetables and 4 ounces of protein, and they don't eat any starch. But man, is that sustainable for anyone other than the people running those programs? I haven't seen it. especially now when we have a solution, you can eat more and weigh less. But he talked about the importance of choosing a supportive food environment and focusing on foods that are minimally processed or unprocessed. You don't want your food hyper palatable or too delicious. Dr. Goldhammer says you can enjoy your food, but if it's really good, you might want to spit it out because it makes us overeat. He said people do not realize how many calories they're eating when there's added fat. And a mere teaspoon of oil is 40 calories, all the fat. And we learned in this last lecture from Dr. McDougall that the fat you eat is the fat you wear. And from Dr. Rick Dina yesterday that it's much easier to control weight with a diet that's lower in fat and higher in complex carbohydrates. He said unsupportive food cues make it a lot harder to eat the way you want to eat because you'll always be fighting yourself and exerting willpower if you keep these foods in your environment. Dr. Lyle talks about how the most important rule for healthy living is to work harder on our environment than we do ourselves, which is why you can negotiate these things with the people you live with. He says it's easier and better to exert the willpower before you're in that environment or situation. And you don't want tempting foods in there at all. And I could go on and on with all he talked about exercise. He was just brilliant. He was a very, very kind person. And I hope I get to talk to him again. So here's some honorable mentions for your wonderful comments. Diana Fair. Our personal responsibility begins with the next bite we take. Wow, that was an eye-opener. This summit has been outstanding. From frigid southern Michigan, where I enjoyed a hot, delicious potato and corn chowder for lunch. And thank you for listening from beautiful Palm Springs, where it's now 70 degrees and sunny. And I'll be enjoying probably a delicious sweet potato for lunch. Lady Love, I had to stop watching EastEnders. Every time they'd eat toast, I wanted toast. Well, yeah, it's, cues like he talks about. Colleen Anderson. Through this summit, I hope that Dr. Guillonet and the other speakers will continue to reach a wider audience. I just read an article, America's New Favorite Restaurants are Wawa, Sheetz, and 7-Eleven, which states, convenience stores have reinvented their business to adjust to changing ways American eats. Snacking is becoming consumers' preferred meal of choice, and Americans are cooking fewer of their dinners at home as they eat out or order in from their coach. Our society continues in the wrong direction. It's so sad, but so true, Colleen, and thank you for that comment. Keep sharing, because the more you share, the more you increase your chances of winning. And we notice when people like Cindy McMahon share and share and share, and Robin Bennett don't think it goes unnoticed, and we appreciate it, especially because some people may not know about this. And another way to share is to actually purchase the summit and own it for a lifetime, and then you can actually give it to someone with your free buddy pass. And so now to the prizes. The first prize of 2 travel-size 3-ounce bottles, which easily go through TSA in your flavor of choice, goes to Mary Canfield, and her comment is, great talk by Dr. Guillonet. Very interesting that we now eat 218 more calories now than in the early 1970s. And it's mostly due to calories eaten in between meals. Also, once you're fat, your body wants to hold on to it, so it's harder for you to lose weight. I love his strategies on eliminating food cues, controlling your environment, and making sure your food isn't too seductive in order to stay on track to lose weight. So enjoy your vinegar, Mary. You know my favorite flavors are the smoke, the sweet heat, and the curry flavor. And anyone can get 2 free samples simply by saying Chef AJ in the leave us a message box. And Gail St. Laurent, you are going to be getting a bottle of my favorite salt-free seasoning, Benson's Table Tasty. And so true, that sensory cue, it's everywhere. So I have learned to blank it. And now for some Kaylin Harwell skincare, we are gifting all the way in Massachusetts, Lisa Diertely. I don't know if I said your name right, but I just noticed that the first 4 letters of your last name, Lisa, is diet. One thing that has been mentioned several times from several people is that you can't outrun your bad diet. It's amazing that most people don't understand that, but I'm glad I learned that a while back through all these speakers over the years. I had listened when these were introduced last year, but I had gotten off track and now it's getting back on. The holidays were difficult, but now they're over and it's time to get back into action. Started taking a Pilates class with my husband last month, and not only is it an exercise that I really like, but it's a way for me to get my husband involved. Just my birthday last week, and my motto this year is 53, a brand new me. So happy birthday, Lisa, and enjoy the beautiful cruelty-free vegan products from Kaylin Harwell in honor of your birthday, and get those leg muscles nice and strong, because remember, leg strength correlates with brain health. And from Florida, Delon Clance says that Kevin Hall's recent study of processed versus less processed food, and he quotes the study, shows that on a less processed diet, people on average ate 500 calories less a day on the less processed, while all macros were held constant and people had access to as much food as they wanted. The calorie density of the eaten food was 1.3 calories a gram. On the processed food, it was 1.08 calories a gram. On the unprocessed, that is. If I remember correctly, Dr. Lyle talks about the average calorie density of the hunter-gatherer groups is about 1 to 1.2 calories a gram. I know that Dr. Lyle talked about that our average calorie density is about 700 calories per pound, and we will be sending you something that is 4 calories per gram, which is date sugar and date syrup, and we hope that you enjoy it very much, Dalen Clance, and thank you so much for sharing your comments. So, the next prize is a bundle of actual hard copy cookbooks from Jocelyn Grafe, and she wrote The Low-Fat Herbivore, and she has really delicious McDougall-style recipes. And since you mentioned that Dr. McDougall was a hoot, we are going to be gifting this to you, Gina Miller-Britton from California. Dr. McDougall, you are a hoot. I loved your perfect analogy. If you do keto to lose weight, why not take chemotherapy? You'll get the same results, lose a lot of weight, get terribly sick, and possibly die. It's been a life-changing week for me with what I have learned from this summit, the truth about weight loss. Join in live, watch the replay, or purchase the entire program to use later at your leisure. I'm not promoting this to gain any monetary perks. I'm simply sharing only because this information is life-changing. I produced a short series for PBS, Obesity, the Epidemic of the New Millennium in 2000, and here we are 20 years later, and it's still an epidemic and a killer. Thank you, Chef AJ, for bringing us this gem. Happy Valentine's Day, and happy Valentine's Day to you, to Gina, and I know you'll enjoy this book. These books, actually, it's all of her books, because one of my most popular recipes, my black bean mushroom chili, was based on Jocelyn's delicious recipe. So, our next speaker is a very short interview. So if you're going to comment, you got to comment sort of at the beginning, because we've got to get all the prize winners before our little breaks. And I just want to remind you, if you want a prize, you must email us at hello@Better Life Summits, preferably with the day you won and what you won, your name if it's different from your Facebook name, and you need to email us no later than Monday, February 17th. Our next speaker is a rock star in the nutrition world. If you're a layperson, you may not have heard of him, but anyone who is a medical doctor that is interested in nutrition knows him. His name is Dr. Walt Willett, and he talks about how we can solve the obesity epidemic for the sake of our children, the planet, and ourselves.
Hi, Dr. Willett, and welcome to the Real Truth About Weight Loss Summit. It really is an honor getting to talk to you.
Well, my pleasure to be talking with you.
Well, thank you so much. Now, you've written an incredible book with an amazing title called Thinfluence, where you talk about how things like family, friends, work, and environment have a surprising effect on our weight. So how do these influences affect our weight? Is obesity contagious?
Obesity is really something that could be considered as a contagious disease, because what we eat, our relationship with food, how we exercise, how we get to work, are all heavily influenced by the environment around us, and specifically the people around us. So one of the really interesting observations about weight is how much it varies from one country to another. For example, in Japan, the prevalence of obesity in women is still about 5% or a little bit less, whereas it's about 40% in the United States. And if you look at the quality of diets that people are eating, at this point in time, they're really not very different at all. So it does seem that it's not just the quality of the diet, but really the environment. And I've done my own little focus group informally when I visit Japan and ask women why they're not obese or why they're not overweight. And they all say this would be the worst thing that could happen to a Japanese woman would be to become overweight or obese, really indicating that there's a very powerful influence of culture. And then, of course, they've designed a culture to support that. Instead of a Western type of eating experience where we place great value on quantity, not quality. In Japan, there's traditionally a lot of attention to quality of the diet. Portion sizes are much smaller, and you're not expected to eat until you're full. You're expected to finish eating before you're full. Whereas here, really a good meal means feeling stuffed, loosening your belt, walking away from the table, belching. It's really a totally different kind of culture. From an eating perspective, and that seems to be very powerful. Those influences can come from members of our own families, sometimes supporting us, but sometimes undermining us in terms of helping us maintain our weight.
I've heard that concept, the Hari Hachi Bu, where we're supposed to eat to 80% full, but I only know what 100% full feels like. I don't know how to figure out what 80% full is.
Well, I think there's no exact number, of course. We don't have a little meter on us that tells us how percent full we are. But I think if we're satisfied and thinking about are we satisfied, in some ways this is a mindfulness issue of paying attention to what we eat, how we feel, where unfortunately very often we eat and continue to eat. There's food all around us, which of course is made in a maximally tempting way. And we're encouraged to eat until we're full and maybe have a little bit of extra, go back for seconds and thirds. And it's often an expression of love. Why aren't you eating it? And often it's guilt by other people who know they're overweight and shouldn't be eating the way they are. And they want other people to look like them. They don't want to be felt guilty by someone paying attention to what they're eating. So there's a huge interaction with the people around us, but then on a bigger scale too. Clearly, we live in a capitalistic system where every food company is out there trying to get us to eat more of their product. And they do massive amounts of research, billions of research every year to find out how to make their products most seductive and then how to get their marketing, packaging, distribution as maximally seductive as it can be. So we're just humans. We're all born starting at the same point. We all have the same vulnerabilities. But every industry out there is working hard by both design a product and by marketing to seduce us, to undermine our defenses against overeating. So we're in, as time goes on, the imbalance just gets greater and greater.
Yeah, it's incredible. We weren't really designed for this kind of an environment. I spent some time working in Japan, and I noticed that even though they did have some of our fast food like McDonald's and KFC and 31 flavors, they seem to eat a much healthier diet, lots of vegetables, things like that.
In general, yes, the diet quality is good. There are changes going on in Japan too. In the youngest generation, McDonald's is starting to make an impact there. Obviously, not in a good way. So, but a lot of their tradition does support healthy eating, and not surprisingly, Japanese are living about 6 years longer on average than Americans. Probably the biggest single factor contributing to that is the fact that they have not experienced the obesity epidemic like we have. Our life expectancy is going down. Theirs continues to just skyrocket.
Yeah, that scares me because I once heard the Surgeon General say this is the first generation of children that won't live as long as our parents. What effect, I'm 60 years old, and when I went to school in the 60s, there was one overweight kid per class for the longest time. Now it's very common to see children overweight and obese. What effect will this have on future generations for them developing these adult diseases like type 2 diabetes at such young ages?
Yeah, the impact of this is hugely serious. We're actually starting to experience that already. It's not just a hypothetical projection anymore. For example, rates of cardiovascular disease had been coming steadily down since the 1960s. About cardiovascular mortality decreased by about 80% in this country. A huge public health success. Life expectancy went up 10 years. But now in the younger generation, we're seeing cardiovascular disease rates going back up among not just the youngest, even up to people in their 50s and low 60s. That downward trend is reversed. Also for colorectal cancer and other obesity-related cancers, where the rates had been coming down steadily year by year, now that's reversed. In adults under 50, colorectal cancer rates are actually going up again. And as those generations move through into later years, it's very likely that those excess rates, those increases, will go along with them. So the downturn in life expectancy is partly due to opioid deaths, but there's a bigger underlying trend that's clearly related to the obesity epidemic. That generation that became overweight and obese as children are now starting to experience the consequences.
Wow.
Very sad.
Wow. So what can we do about it, Dr. Wood?
Well, there's no simple fix to this. The causes, as I've started to talk about, are very multifactorial, operate within families and communities, within national food distribution systems, government policy, international trade. All of those factors are driving us towards higher obesity rates. Part of why I wrote with my colleague, Dr. Wood's influence, was to help people understand these external factors that are influencing us toward adverse health. And if we can understand them, we can learn how to sometimes make end runs around those problems, sometimes really actively change those factors that are operating to our disadvantage, and help a lot of other people at the same time. So I think this starts with an understanding that we're not just weak-willed people, and you know how you can't blame kids for getting obese. I mean, they're not supposed to have the knowledge and the understanding of all of these complex factors and ways to make good food choices and be active. What we're doing is really exploiting children, shortening their lives, increasing their suffering by this system that is driving overeating and underactivity, and ultimately obesity, premature diseases, and premature death. In fact, it's really a criminal situation if you actually look at what's happening to innocent children who are now becoming adults and carrying that extra weight along with them.
Because you say you're right, you can't blame children. They're not able to drive to the 7-Eleven. Somebody is getting them their food.
Right. Unfortunately, the 7-Elevens are often placed right on the way home from school. There's a lot of thought and effort and money that goes into seducing children to eat in a bad way and be more inactive. So understanding is part of it. If you want to look at some specific targets that clearly what we've looked at and other people have arrived at, that sugar-sweetened beverages are the number one single factor, but there's no single factor that explains all of the problems. That the whole dietary pattern of refined starches, sugar, lots of red meat is pushing people in a direction that is not good for their health and well-being. On the other hand, we can see that a more traditional Mediterranean type diet with more vegetables, less processed overall, more fruit, nuts, whole grains, some yogurt. It doesn't have to be a vegetarian diet necessarily, although that's a possible way to go. That's where we should be heading, but we can say that helping people move in that direction is complex.
I find that once people get used to this Western diet full of all this junk food, it's harder to get them to eat healthy things like fruits and vegetables.
It's hard. Again, it's hard partly because we were being seduced and pressured from every direction. You just step out the door or probably open your refrigerator. Food is there everywhere, and it's relatively inexpensive, and the worst things are less expensive in general. We have to make active effort really now to avoid being seduced by the environment in which we're living.
Yeah, all the experts on this summit seem to agree that environment, it really does play a critical role in one's success for losing weight and overcoming a lifestyle disease. So thank you for talking about its importance and writing a wonderful book about it. You know, you had mentioned red meat, and in an interview, I once heard you say that the keto diet is a very selfish diet. I was wondering if you could please not only elaborate on that, but what do you think of these low-carb diets in terms of weight loss? I know they facilitate weight loss in the short term, but don't they mortgage our health in the long term? And have they even been proven to be sustainable for long-term weight management?
Yeah. Well, there's a couple interpretations of sustainable here. First is on an individual basis, are they sustainable in the long run? And we really don't know. You can anecdotally, some people are doing pretty well in the long run on a very low carbohydrate ketogenic diet, and you can find some individuals, but in general, studies that have tried to look at this very low carbohydrate diets find that the very small percentage of people are able to maintain that for a year or more. So it's difficult, and partly because we're living in an environment that doesn't support that sort of extreme either. But there does seem to be some innate drives that want us to have some fat and some carbohydrate diet. It's very interesting. In our large studies of hundreds of thousands of people, we find very, very few people who are actually very low carbohydrate or very high, very low fat, or very low carbohydrate or very low fat. There's something about our biology that does want us to have some balance between carbohydrates and fat. We don't really understand all those drives completely, but that's part of the reason I think that people have difficulty maintaining the diets, whether they're on one extreme or the other in terms of fat versus carbohydrates. Now, it is important to mention that many people interpret the ketogenic diet as being lots of red meat and animal products. If someone does want to go on a low carbohydrate diet, it doesn't have to be high in these foods, which are from other standpoint in terms of cardiovascular disease and diabetes, very likely to increase the risk of those conditions, even if we maintain a healthy weight. But one can have a very low carbohydrate diet that is even vegan, or some other kind of flexitarian diet, that vegetables, olive oil, other plant oils, lots of salads, modest amount of fish. Those can actually be part of, and I should add nuts and seeds, very healthy protein sources. You can create a very low carbohydrate diet that's made out of healthy foods. And if someone is going to go in at very low carbohydrate, it's, I think, much more desirable to go in that direction. And for some people, again, it may work. And I don't want to say nobody should ever consume that kind of diet. In part, we don't have the long-term studies that we really would like to have. The other issue, though, is in terms of sustainability, is the sustainability of our planet and whole environment. And this, some people make a distinction between individual health and planetary health, but we clearly, in the long run, can't have healthy individuals in a planet that is sick and going in the direction that it's going right now. So these are really tightly linked. And everyone eating a large amount of red meat is just simply not possible to have on a diet, on a planet that's healthy.
Yeah, thank you so much for saying that. I really appreciate it. What do you think of the series of papers that were in the Annals of Internal Medicine journals that talked about that it was okay to eat processed meats?
Yeah, that article had, first of all, the main problem with this was the title and the press releases that claimed this was new dietary guidelines. And that is highly misleading. A process of setting dietary guidelines is really a much more complex process that involves a review of the evidence, all of the evidence, and consideration by experts who have worked in this area. This paper actually had no experts in really diet and health. It was mostly statisticians and people like that. And the one senior nutritionist on the paper actually was a laboratory scientist who does not work in the area of diet and long-term health. So this was put together by people without experience, but the specifics of the paper were very problematic. They excluded all the huge body of evidence on how diet affects risk factors like blood cholesterol, blood pressure, insulin resistance, and glucose levels. And that's a really important part of the literature. It then threw out all the observational studies because they said the studies were weak. Well, not all of them were perfect, and there is no perfect study in this area, because then they said you need to have evidence, you'd really strong evidence or even moderate evidence, you'd have to have randomized trials looking at clinical endpoints like heart disease and cancer. And they even acknowledge that such studies for red meat are probably not possible, because that would mean you'd have to get thousands of people to agree to be randomized to say high intake of processed meats or low intake of processed meats, and then keep those people on those diets for many years. And it's really not probably ethically possible. Our Human Subjects Committee would not allow that to be done. And it's very unlikely that very many people would agree to being randomized to one or the other and stay on those diets for a long time. In fact, what's really telling, the senior author of that paper was asked by a reporter afterwards whether he could whether a physician should be able to guide a patient to eat a bowl of sugar or salad. And the author said, the evidence is so weak, I couldn't make any recommendation. They should eat what they like. So if you can't distinguish a bowl of salad from a bowl of sugar, that's not the person I think most people would want to have making their dietary guidelines.
Yeah.
So the real problem here was that, yeah, there's lots of bad studies in the literature, but the fact that the journal proclaimed this was new dietary guidelines for red meat consumption was really sensationalist and alarming and totally inappropriate.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So a lot of people tout dairy products as not only essential to human health, but good for weight loss. How do you feel about that?
That dairy products are clearly not essential for good health, although I grew up in Wisconsin and Michigan in a dairy family for many generations. So that's part of our Northern European eating culture. And a moderate amount of dairy consumption does seem consistent, possibly with good health. It does have nutrients in it, but we also have eating cultures from around the world that don't consume any dairy, and they can also be very healthy as well. So it's not essential. If people are going to have dairy products, there may be some advantage to having them in the form of yogurt, possibly because of the effects on the microbiome. But in terms of weight control, there are now a number of long-term observational studies, a number of randomized trials, and there does not seem to be any important benefit or harm on weight per se from dairy product consumption, even though there was a big marketing campaign that this is going to be a very powerful way to control weight. There was a lot of these milk mustache ads around there. I think you want a mustache, go a real one.
Like yours, which is very nice. Dr. Willett, what's the real truth about weight loss?
I think in terms of weight loss, it's very possible for people to lose weight. The most important thing is to avoid gaining excess weight to begin with. And so basically, no matter where one is in terms of their weight, trying to avoid gaining more is the first step. And we have lots of evidence now that eating a healthy Mediterranean type diet, and I say Mediterranean because that's where most of the evidence comes from, but you can put that kind of diet together with other flavors, other foods. It can be Asians, Latin American, emphasizing fresh, not just fresh, but fruits in general, vegetables, whole grains, limited amount of red meat, and more emphasizing healthy plant-based protein sources like nuts, seeds, and avoiding, for sure, sugar-sweetened beverages, a lot of juice, and refined starches. that you can put that diet together in thousands of different ways, make it flavorful, varied, enjoyable. So this can be really a double, triple win. In fact, it can be enjoyable, it can be good for your health, and we also know it can now be much more healthy for the planet, which is important to everybody.
Very well said. Thank you so much, Dr. Willett.
Thank you, and good to talk to you.
Well, if you enjoyed Dr. Willett, make a comment on the Facebook page because I'll take screenshots and email them to him because it was really difficult to even get those 20 minutes. So maybe you'll want an hour from him next year if he's willing to do it. So, if you liked him, maybe say something that I can actually show him. So we are getting the comment box, not on the Facebook page, but when I say share them on your Facebook page, that's when to win a prize. But the comments that I'm asking for are on the Summit page where you are listening live right now. And we're getting so many wonderful comments and actually emails from people that are saying that they've lost weight just since the summit started on Saturday, February 8th. One person has lost 3 pounds. And we're having a little bit of a contest here that we want to tell you about to award some of the bigger grand prizes like the Instant Pots and the Holland Bowl Mill. And so what you have to do is you actually have to email us by 8 p.m. Pacific time on Saturday, February 15th, that's tomorrow, because we need a couple hours before we go to bed to read these. And what we'd like for you to do is share your story on how this summit either has impacted you already or how you feel it's going to. And what?
And your personal story.
Yeah, your personal story, of course. So so please consider doing that for some of the grand prizes, which will be awarded on Sunday. We do need to receive those emails by 8 p.m. Pacific time at hello@Better Life Summits to be eligible. And so to share some of the nice comments from Dr. Willett's talk, we have some honorable mention. Ralph Henderson, who says, Dr. Willett is so on point. It takes a lot of practice to limit your portions so that you're only 80% full. It's easy to over or underestimate, but practice is the key. I didn't share my takeaways, by the way, which I'll have to do before our next speaker. Lynn Fisher Temchula says, so true, Dr. Willett. My son isn't marrying into a Japanese family, but a Chinese family. His fiance, parents, siblings, cousins, and grandparents are not only thin, but have beautiful skin and happy dispositions. We recently stayed at the grandparents' house, and for breakfast, they had sea kelp, mung bean, bok choy, and other vegetables. I've been saying that for years, people. That's why I promote vegetables for breakfast. Every other country in the world except for the United States eats it, at least countries that are not overweight and obese. They keep their vegetables and rice in their refrigerator and pantry, so it's always on hand. It was so wonderful staying with like-minded people that take for granted how healthy they eat. Don't even need to think about it. Truly eat to live and not live to eat. Yep, Asians have a 3% obesity rate. And they eat carbs. I guess they didn't get the memo that rice is bad, rice is bad because they are the trimmest people on the planet. And we learned from Dr. Willett that their longevity is skyrocketing as ours is decreasing. Peggy Smith said, been listening on the phone, so no way to comment in the first 2 interviews, but Dr. Willett's take on the ketogenic diet is very insightful. I really appreciate how he said it was a selfish diet. I really like that he was not afraid to say that. For the last couple of years, I've been drinking my ketones, and at first I lost a ton of weight. Many in my family lost a ton of weight. Over time, the weight came back on. It's not something that we should try to use as a weight loss and weight maintenance system. I've already lost about 3 pounds with the plant-based focus in only about 2 days. Congratulations. It is something that is sustainable, it is healthy, and it is doable. I cannot wait to keep this going. I feel so much more alert. I'm satisfied, and you can't beat that. And you can't. You're so right. Maybe share your story through email, Peggy, for one of the grand prizes. So the 2 prizes we are going to award right now for the travel size bottles of California balsamic vinegar in your flavors of choice. They go through TSA quite easily. Thank you, Thomas from California Balsamic, for offering 3 prizes of 2 bottles per day. From Marietta, Georgia, Heidi Francisco Hans, who says, the fact that there are few overweight women in Japan shows it can be done. I bet they don't snack as much either. Add the overweight of our the overweight of our children is heartbreaking. Good points. By the way, my daughter bought me seaweed crackers for Valentine's Day. Perfect. Yes, it is. Congratulations, Heidi. And Benson's Table Tasty. Thank you, Debbie Benson, for offering also 3 bottles a day. And we have a 2-pound bottle coming up on Sunday. 2-pound bag, that is. Kelly and Stanko, who said, I absolutely loved listening to this during my workday. Since the new year, I have been on a new journey to a healthy lifestyle that I have always craved but never changed my thought process until now. I have gained more clarity in welcoming every experience as a new one instead of assuming I've already done this and I know the outcome. I have been vegetarian for over 20 years but still ate my fair share of processed food. Now I've been eating a 95% whole food plant-based diet and eliminating alcohol, doing yoga, strengthening, and running 5 days a week, and don't ever see myself turning back. My mind is more clear, my outlook is bright, and including this essential information has just been the perfect time to solidify this new life. Thank you so much for putting this out there for all of us. I thought I knew a lot about how food affects your body, mood, and mind, but this is incredible. Thank you so much. What is the vinegar you've been talking about, Chef AJ? Well, we probably should have given you the vinegar instead of the spice, but that's okay because it's California balsamic, and anyone can get 2 free samples simply by mentioning Chef AJ and leave us a message box. It's a delicious salad dressing or marinade or anything you can use on your rice and vegetables, and I've done many YouTube videos to show it, and it's called California balsamic. So I forgot to share my takeaways from Dr. Willett, but I think my favorite thing that he said is, if you can't distinguish a bowl of sugar from a bowl of salad, we don't want you making our dietary guidelines. And that is so true. But look who is making them, people that actually can't distinguish this. He talked about something that Dr. Dean Ornish will talk about today in the bonus interview, which is that obesity is actually a contagious disease. It is heavily influenced by our diet, but even more so by the people around us, which is why we have to control our environment, like Dr. Guillenette said in the last interview. It's astounding that Japanese women, or Japanese in general, have only a 5% obesity rate compared to the United States, which has a 40% obesity rate. And it's not just the quality of the diet, but again, the environment. And he said that their life expectancy in Japan has increased 6 years more than in the United States. It's skyrocketing where ours is getting less and less. Why? Because of obesity. So he said that the generation that became overweight and obese in children are now experiencing all of the consequences. So we really have to know that things like sugar-sweetened beverages, red meat, refined carbohydrates, these are not going to help us in terms of health or in terms of losing weight and keeping that weight off. But what will help is listening to this summit, so we want you to consider sharing it so we can end the obesity epidemic once and for all. And if you can't afford to purchase the summit, you can share it for free on your Facebook pages with your friends so people can listen for absolutely free. But when you do purchase it for a nominal amount, it helps us continue our work, spread this message, continue the message, and by giving you a free buddy pass, it's like getting 2 summits for the price of 1. So our last interview of the day is my friend and executive chef of the True North Health Center, Ramses Bravo. He's not only an incredible chef who's going to show you some delicious salad dressing recipes where he creates seductive flavors just in time for Valentine's Day, but he himself lost 50 pounds eating this kind of food. Enjoy Chef Bravo.
Hi, Chef Bravo, and welcome to the Real Truth About Weight Loss Summit. So what have you got cooking for us?
Hey, AJ, thanks for having me. So what I have for you is a couple of dressings / sauces, which are very geared towards weight loss. There's a lot of, for me, flavors, the biggest thing for any sort of diet. Whether it's regular food or, True North, weight loss, Google, whatever it is. For me, it always has to taste good, because if it doesn't taste good, people are not going to follow it. Within those, parameters, you can still make it, weight loss effective. So I got a couple simple things. I didn't want to do anything too complicated. A couple very quick winners for all the audience. I'm making a strawberry balsamic dressing, and also a roasted pepper and cilantro dressing slash sauce. Both of which are nut and seed free, so it'll be like super easy, very flavorful, and very on target with the weight loss thing.
Well, those both sound delicious, and I know how talented you are because you're not only the executive chef for many years at the True North Health Center, but you also teach cooking there as well as at the McDougall Live-In program.
Right. Yeah, I've been there since True North moved to the new facility there in downtown Santa Rosa, 12 plus years now. And then I've been teaching for the McDougall program 3 years.
Right. And what's incredible is that you did not come to this as somebody following a plant-based diet or somebody that was naturally SOS-free, sugar, oil, salt-free, but you had an extraordinary background as a real chef at a hotel.
Right. So I come from regular cooking world. I grew up, in my grandmother's kitchen, and then because of her, I always knew that I was going to be a chef. So right out of high school, went to culinary school, then a chef's training program. And throughout that whole time, it was, just regular food. If it moved, there was a way to cook it, slice it, and serve it. And so I did that for 12-ish years. And then, the universe just sort of worked its magic. And then suddenly I found myself working for Alan Goldhammer and thinking, wow, what did I just do, kind of a thing. So,
well, I'm glad you did that because you're helping a lot of people. And I think one of the reasons you're such an extraordinary SOS-free whole food plant-based chef is because you know what food was supposed to taste like when it has that stuff in it.
Right. So that's really my strength, is drawing from all of those experiences, from all of those flavor combinations, from all that knowledge, because that's what I know. And that's how I grew up, in the chefness speaking. And so I pretty much all my inspiration comes from that. And instead of just, making it animal protein based or regular cooking, I just use all my knowledge, redirect it a little, and then poof, there we go. True North cuisine.
Well, we're happy that you were able to make that transition. So let's get started on these amazing sounding recipes.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah. And by the way, before it gets going, thank you so much. I mentioned that I've been cooking for the McDougall program for about 3 years, and I owe you that gig, actually. So
I wish I could teach there. That's amazing.
Well, yeah, it's so close to True North, so it makes it easy for me.
Okay. I see there's somebody in the corner there that's looking at me.
Oh yeah, this guy. So this is a patient at True North made this for me, Eileen. She's our resident puppeteer. She's made puppets for a lot of the staff there, and so this is me.
That's adorable.
Yeah, she made this for me about 3-4 years ago, maybe. Although it's a little inaccurate now because I don't have as much hair anymore. So, but he lives right here next to the mixer.
Yeah, I have a chef puppet too, as you know. His name is Luigi.
Yeah. Okay, so the focus is now going to be on the blender. So I may not be in the shot, but that's okay. You'll still hear my voice. Okay, so a couple different things. For me, it's not about reinventing the wheel. It's about, again, using that same knowledge and applying it to a plant-based type of cooking. And within those realms, we can certainly do something that's focused on weight loss. So here we go. We're going to do the strawberry balsamic first. Now, this one is very simple because it just goes sweet and sour. You've probably heard of sweet and sour sauce, sweet and sour probably chicken, sweet and sour this, sweet and sour, fill in the blank kind of thing. The combination of sweet and sour has been working for hundreds, probably thousands of years. And as long as we're around to continue to cook, sweet and sour will always work because two contrasting flavors coming together, and then you eat it in whichever form, in a dressing, in a salad, however it is. Your taste buds go, okay, there's the sweet, there's the sour, and it just jumps back and forth, and the brain is like, wow, this is a really nice combination. So that's the idea behind this one. So my sweet here is the strawberries. And then my sour, which is also slightly sweet, is the balsamic.
I love balsamic vinegar.
Yeah, it's amazing. And so one of the things to consider is the fact that there is quite a bit of moisture within the strawberries. And so I don't want to overdo the balsamic because I'm going to rely on the strawberries themselves to provide the thickness for the dressing. So because it is a dressing, we still want it to be like a regular dressing. We want it to act and behave like a regular dressing. So it has to be not only flavorful, but it's got to be nice and thick. So once you pour it on your salad, it just sort of stays there. Nothing worse than, you have a dressing and it's so runny that it's almost like pouring like water or broth over your salad. And now it's like swimming in there and you're like, this is, this kind of ruins it a little. So, yeah, we have to, account for the fact that the strawberries are part of the flavor and the thickener as well. So I start out with just a little balsamic. If I need to add some more, that's fine. And then I'm going to add a couple of shallots, probably about one shallot for what I have here. The shallot here provides that sort of secret ingredient kind of thing where it gives the whole thing a little bit of balance. So again, the sweet and sour do balance each other out. They complement each other well. But you want that little extra something. So it's like, in there. I don't know what it is, but it's really nice. And then you go through the recipe. Oh, of course, shallots. That's good. All right. So sorry if this gets a little loud. All right. And so here I go with my, let's see.
Now, I noticed, Chef Bravo, that you didn't measure.
No. Here's the reason. I always tell people that a recipe, it's a sort of a guideline. It isn't the, written in stone kind of a thing. Because, for example, this recipe calls for strawberries. Let's say it's 2 cups. So if I make this recipe with 2 cups of strawberries, and then you make the same recipe with 2 cups of strawberries, the strawberries I have are probably going to be, more or less sweet than the ones you have. Or maybe I'm making this recipe right now during wintertime, but then I make it again during the summertime. The sweetness level is going to be different. So the best way to go about a recipe is to make sure you taste the product as it goes, and then you adjust. It's like, maybe it's just a little bit more balsamic, maybe another little piece of shallot. And so a recipe is more of a guideline, not a, you must follow this kind of a thing. That's the way I see it.
Yeah. Well, that's incredible that it's only 3 ingredients.
Yeah, pretty simple. And so let me show you. I'm going to grab my ladle here. And I don't know how well you can see this, but it's
thick.
It's thick. Yeah, of course. So again, you want this to act like a dressing. So you don't go, hey, strawberry balsamic dressing, and then somebody goes, oh, let me try that, and then it's like the wrong consistency kind of thing, and they're like, this dressing doesn't do it for me, and that person hasn't even tasted it because the consistency, the texture isn't right. So
have you ever used something like chia seeds as a natural thickener?
I have for other things, yeah, of course. Chia seeds are great. Yeah. Okay. So I put together a quick little salad here, just some cucumbers, spinach, and a few carrots. And so now I pour this over the top.
You make your food so pretty.
Well, it's the seduction part. It's got to look good so people go, "Ooh, what's in that?" And then you start telling them, and then you're like, "Well, it's this, the cucumber salad kind of thing, and then there's the strawberry balsamic dressing." And if it looks pretty, people are going to be interested. And then you tell them what it is, and they're like, "Well, can I have a little sample? Can I get a little taste?" And then once they get that little taste of all the flavors and the textures are in there, they're like, "Oh, can I get a full portion?" So this is how it works in the regular chef's world. It's that, make it look pretty, so you start the seduction, make it taste good, so it continues, and then people are hooked. So the mechanics work the same for a plant-based diet or a weight loss program type of food.
Beautiful. Have you ever served that particular dressing at True North?
Oh yeah, all the time. This is one of our sort of what do we call it? The normal, one of the many dressings in the normal rotation of all the dressings that we serve at True North. So, yeah.
And do you recommend any type of balsamic vinegar? Like, do you ever use the reduced ones?
I'm a little cautious when I use the reduced balsamics because of the concentration, the possible concentration of lead in them. Also, I steer away from flavored balsamics because a lot of times they'll use sugar added to the thing. So the one I like to use is this O balsamic. It's a company here out of Napa, California, which take into consideration the levels of lead. So they do a great job with that. So O balsamic, really good.
Great. I've seen it at the store, actually.
Yeah. And it's not the only one. Don't think that this is the only balsamic you should consume. There are other great ones. Trying to remember the other balsamic company that we use, which they do some flavored ones and they're really clean. Hang on, I have some here. California balsamic. Yeah, look. So I have some here as well. So this company here is another great company. They've come to True North and done some tastings and demos. We really like them. They do a lot of flavored stuff, and they're clean. They don't use any sugar in there. So I like that as well. Except all their balsamics that they bring in are flavored, and for this one, I needed just a plain balsamic, so that's why I used the O. Yeah.
Look, I can't wait to try that dressing. It's so simple, and I have all the ingredients on hand.
Yeah. So that one's from my second book, Bravo Express, and then the one I'm about to show you now is from my first book as well, the Bravo Cookbook.
And they're both great, and I have them both, and they're signed.
Yeah. Cool. All right. So again, very simple. For this one, let me set the balsamic here to the side. So for this one, it's going to be some roasted bell peppers. These are red bell peppers, which I basically just cut in half. I take the seeds out, and then I roast them in the oven at 425 degrees, skin side up, until the skin sort of turns black. And then you let them cool down, you remove the skin, and voila, you have roasted bell peppers. I used to do these by the case back in my regular chef days. And back then we would always, same thing, cut them in half, take the seeds out, put them in the baking pan, skin side up. But we would always brush them with some olive oil. And you think, well, this really helps them roast. So I would add oil to the whole thing. But honestly, completely unnecessary. I've done them this way now at True North for many years, 12 years now. And they come out the same. There is no need at all for the oil being brushed on them. So for those of you out there thinking, well, you always have to brush them, you don't. These were done without the oil on top, and they come out beautiful.
What is it about roasting that makes everything, whether it's starch or vegetable or fruit, it just like magically makes food taste better?
Well, actually, it's a very simple answer to that question. When you're roasting something in the oven, you are evaporating the natural water content of that item. So by volume, you are reducing the amount of material, and yet you still have the same amount of flavor. So it concentrates. So that's one of the things that happen in the oven. The other thing is that you're also caramelizing the natural sugars of that particular food item that you're using. And so not only are you changing the flavor a little by caramelizing those natural sugars, but you're also concentrating the flavor at the same time by evaporating the water content. So that's the answer to your question there.
Well, thanks for explaining it. You just explained why roasted sweet potatoes taste better than baked, which tastes better than steamed, which tastes better than microwaved.
There, that's a nice sequence you got there. Yes, so roasted sweet potatoes have more of the flesh exposed to the heat, and therefore there's more evaporation and more caramelization of those natural sugars. So yes, yes, good. And by the way, you should always clip the ends of your sweet potatoes when if you're just going to bake them. Clip the ends so that the moisture, the water content, has a exit route. So that again, you evaporate more water, you get more flavor, more concentrated flavor. So
great tip.
There you go. Okay, so again, roasted bell peppers. I'm going to use shallot again. I like using shallots a lot. Having onions and just about everything, for me, it's very important because it creates a depth of flavor. So shallot goes in.
I agree with you. I have a saying, everything starts with an onion. I don't know how any chef cooks without onion, and I don't know how anybody eats without onion.
Yeah, that's my hardest challenge when people come in at True North. And I can deal easily with the gluten-free and the soy-free and the no starch, no grain kind of thing. But if somebody says I can't have onion or garlic, oh man, you're killing me.
I agree.
That is the hardest of all. All right. So for this one, I'm going to use some of True North's finest vegetable broth, which I brought from work here at the house. All right. And then a touch of coriander to this, and a touch of cumin. So the play on this is sweet and sort of spicy kind of a thing. Not in the hot pepper kind of spice, but in the, there's spices in there between the onion, the coriander, and the cumin. Put that together with the sweetness of the red bell pepper. It's a great combination. And then to that, I like to add the sort of fresh, earthy flavor of a little bit of cilantro, which adds a little bit of color contrast as well. It's a great combination. So here we go. Again, I am relying on the bell peppers here to provide not only flavor, color, but also the thickness to the dressing. So we don't need any nuts or seeds here either. All right. Now,
I almost feel like that could almost be a soup.
It could. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that before, but yes, you could make it into a soup. And again, I'll show you the nice thickness of it. So I know I'm on the right path here.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I'm not very familiar with using coriander. What kind of profile does that have?
Coriander are the seeds of cilantro. So if you like cilantro, you're going to love coriander because it's sort of the almost like the dried version of it. If you hate cilantro, you probably won't like coriander. And there are some people out there who are, are haters, cilantro haters. And it's not their fault. It's a genetic kind of thing where they taste cilantro and they taste soap, which is the biggest, the most common complaint of people who don't like cilantro. So yeah, I love coriander because I love cilantro. Okay, so now I'm going to add the cilantro in here. And again, if you're not a big fan of cilantro, you can substitute basil in here.
Oh, that would sound very good as well.
Now, here is the very important. You don't add the cilantro in the beginning as you're trying to blend the bell peppers, because then the sauce ends up having this sort of muddy brown kind of thing. All right. So the cilantro goes at the end, and it's more of a chop throughout the sauce rather than a blended in there. Just like that. And now, I don't know how well you can see it. Let me see. So you see the little green specks all throughout, right? Rather than all blended in there, and now it's the sort of muddy brownish color. And you go, I don't know about that. Because again, you want that seduction, and it's got to look good. So you're like, oh yeah, I want to try that. Okay. I don't know exactly what it is, but I see all those specks in there. It's probably good. Probably tasty. So, let me have a little sample, and then you sample and you're like, oh, okay, yeah, definitely give me a bowl of it. Yeah. For this one, I had this plate of broccoli here, which again, this could be a dressing, or it could be a little dipping sauce. It works like that as well.
Oh, that sounds great.
You could heat it up. Cold is great. We serve it cold at True North, but you have your broccoli. You go, oh, okay, a little dipping sauce. Boom, there you go. Yeah. And I'm not going to eat this right now because I know we still got to talk. I don't want to have broccoli.
Right. but you do eat your own food, right?
Oh, of course, yes. I it would be pointless for me not to.
I can't wait to hear how eating your own food has created a little bit of transformation in your body.
Oh, well, let's see. When I got to True North, let me clean up here a little bit. So when I got to True North, I had just left my other job. Oh, by the way, I have this here because there's a little bit of optional black pepper for that strawberry balsamic. So, but that's an optional ingredient. So when I left my job, my previous job, hotel job, and I got to True North, I was like 210-ish pounds, give or take. Typical overweight chef, low energy, short-tempered, not a lot of patience. Then I got to True North, and then just trying to be professional and do the best I could at that job. I ended up, like you said, you got to eat your own food. So to make sure that it was tasting good and, the patients and the customers were happy. So I would taste the food. And little by little, I wasn't really trying. I was just working, eating the food, making sure it was good, good quality, great flavor. And probably within 6 months, again, without trying, I probably dropped about 30 pounds. I mean, just like that. It was like, out of nowhere, I just got on the scale. I was like, whoa, did that really happen? Because again, I wasn't thinking, it was just, when you start a new job, you focus on so many things. And then a few months later, it was like, wow, this is pretty cool. So I lost a bunch of weight. My energy shot up. And then I sort of had a little bit of chance to look up. Again, when you work in the kitchen, you're working so hard and you're focused on so many things. I kind of took a step back to think, is it just me or is this like actually working? So I started paying more attention to the people who came to True North and the amount of success they were having. And yeah, it was not a fluky thing. I had lost a bunch of weight, and so were they. It was a consistent theme throughout what we do there at True North. So yeah, it was good. I'm going to tilt this just a little bit up so that's my head not getting
So,
caught.
what do you think the biggest difference in the True North style of food that you ate to lose all the weight? I think you're about 50 pounds in total now, versus what you were eating before coming to True North.
The biggest difference? Oh, well, it's definitely the SOS part of it, which is the no salt, no sugar, no oil, which is, what you just saw here. There was no salt added to any of this. No oil, as I mentioned, that none of that brushing of the oil on the peppers. It's just clean, whole food. And the more of it you consume, the more your taste buds adapt to it. It's not an overnight success by any means. The typical person at True North takes, like I did, a couple of weeks to readjust their tolerance to the sodium. And after 2 weeks, I'll get this very common compliment. They're like, hey, when I got here, it wasn't that good, but now 2 weeks later, you're kind of getting the hang of it. You're doing it much better.
And that's hilarious. I remember Dr. Goldhammer telling a story once where the person just after the fast just didn't believe that it was the same chef.
Yeah, that's very common. And so all it is the adaptation to the lowering the resistance to the sodium. And along with that, if you cut out the oil and the sugar, the processed sugar, it's almost inevitable that you're going to lose weight. I mean, it's unless you're eating nothing but avocados and seeds, like it's inevitable that you will lose weight. Yeah,
that's great. And you must have seen a lot of people in your time lose weight coming to True North, eating your food. That must feel really good.
Yeah. I think just about everybody. I don't, as long as they're good about it, they stay within the rules. You get the occasional person that hides things in their room, kind of thing. But that happens. People sometimes they need that sort of reassurance or that comfort food. But if they go through the program and they stick with it, I don't think I've seen anybody not lose weight, whether it's, maybe 1 or 2 pounds to like 50, 60 pounds. It's that good of a program. Yeah.
That is incredible. So was it hard coming from a classically trained background where, like at your hotel, if I ordered asparagus, I would get 3 spears, to the way you learn to eat at True North following the principles of calorie density, where a serving isn't 3 spears, it's like 3 pounds?
Yeah. This job is probably one of the most physically, it's probably one of the hardest jobs I've had physically, because of the volume that we need to serve people. In order to get the same amount of calories, once you remove all the junk food and the oil and everything, you really got to put a lot of food into people's mouths. So it's constant breaking down of case after case after case of the potatoes and the celery and the sweet potatoes and the onions and the oranges and the kale and the everything. And it's just like, we get like not massive, but we get pretty big deliveries 6 days a week. And if we could get them Sunday, we would. Just nobody delivers on Sunday. And so it was, it didn't make sense at the beginning. Just like you said, your portion of vegetables is the 3 spears of asparagus at a restaurant. Suddenly having to cook like half to 3/4 of a bunch of asparagus per person. So yeah, it took some adjusting to do. In the beginning, it was like, oh my God, these people cannot eat this much. It's, what's going on? And then you understand that, calorie density, which by the way, I still have that card you gave me, everything to the left of the line. So then it makes perfect sense. Yeah.
That's so great. And I'm so happy that you learned it, because that's one of the biggest difficulties we have as people that eat in accordance with the principles of calorie density. When we go to a conference or we go to a restaurant, is that we don't get enough food.
Right. Yeah. I had sort of this conversation with this woman named Wanda, who's, I forget her last name, who is part of the National Health Association. And she was asking me for some advice on, talking to the chefs at the conferences they do. And she was having that issue. She's like, we have to tell the chefs, like, we need enough food. And they keep telling us, we're giving you so much food. And they're like, no, that's not close. It's not enough. And it all has to do with calorie density. Yeah.
Yeah. And when you cut out the animal products and the oil and the sugar, you're left with very nutrient dense, calorically dilute food, and you got to eat more of it.
Eat more of it. Yeah, that's right.
And that really is the secret, at least it was for me and so many other people, to weight loss is eating the kind of food that you prepare.
Yeah. It's like I said, it's almost inevitable that you would lose weight eating a True North style of diet, a whole food plant based. It's just really inevitable. We do get the occasional person who has this or that wrong with them, and they need to gain weight, and they come to me, and I'm like, this is going to be hard. Because we're not built to increase weight. It's totally the opposite. So I think in my 12 years there, we've had like 2 or 3 people who come with the opposite problem. And then we got to do a whole bunch of like nut smoothies and avocado sauces and all this kind of stuff. So.
Wow. Other than losing weight, what benefits did you notice when you switched your diet to the True North style?
Probably my definitely energy level. At the time when I went to True North, my daughter was 2 years old, so having that much energy to play with her and spend time with her was definitely a big plus for me. Because before that, it was go to work, come back home, days off, plop on the couch, and not much movement, and just sort of play with my daughter by laying on the couch saying, oh, we'll do that now, we'll go over there and do that, and then after that it was like, okay, you want to go in the yard and sort of run around? Sure, let's do that. So that was the biggest thing for me. And also I think not as moody, I would say. When you eat clean, you're just sort of, for me at least, I can't say for everybody, but I was just more, calm and more clear. Certainly you still get mad, you still go through natural, human emotions, but it was just more even for me. Just the whole, again, just mood swings. It wasn't like, this kind of thing. It was just like, okay, no, we're all right. We'll be fine.
That's great. You know what I think is so cool is that you get other chefs excited in cooking this way, because you've created some really wonderful sous chefs at True North.
Yeah, I do get people who come through the kitchen to learn, and even people, not just sous chefs, just regular cooks, and even the housekeeping department, which come to, we're pretty constant. We have almost the same housekeepers all the time. But because we're there all the time and we get to eat as much as we want there, it's slowly but surely everybody just sort of fall into place. They fall in line, and afterwards they're just excited about it. Yesterday it was my day off, but they were texting me pictures of the potato tacos and potato stuffed what's called an enfrijolada. So if you think about an enchilada, but instead of red salsa, you do like a black bean sauce. And they were all stuffed with potatoes, and they had a little bit of chopped tomatoes, a little bit of guacamole. And, the staff was texting me this. It was like, oh, you look what you missed kind of thing.
Oh, that sounds incredible. Have you ever thought of opening up a culinary school?
No, not a school. What I have done is I created an online cooking program.
Well, thank you for doing that, because it's really a wonderful course, very well thought out and very wonderfully produced. When you started working at True North, you tell a story about how you knew that it was going to be vegan and you didn't have a problem with that, but you had no idea it was going to be sugar-free, oil-free, salt-free. And
oh, yeah, I didn't know that it was SOS free. So what this is like, I'm interviewing for a job as a chef, and this guy's like, yeah, you can't use salt. So it's like crazy. I was very lucky that I went ahead and took the job. And then, like I said, a few months later, I lost all this weight, all these great things are happening. And then I began to understand food in a more well-rounded version of it. So for those of you who are listening, very quickly, so imagine, I'm going to tilt my camera here a little bit now. So this is my countertop right here, the stovetop. So imagine this is your tongue, and then you have like here where I have the burners marked, or the heating elements. So imagine that this is now your taste buds. Okay, this is your tongue, and this is your taste bud. Here's the sour, the spicy, the umami, the sweet, the sour, and then there's also the hang on, it's gonna come to me. The bitter. Okay. Okay. So you have all your taste buds. And then when you cook with oil, it's something like this. Oil goes on your taste buds. It's like a blanket covering them. And then you think, well, you always have to have oil to cook because that's the way it's been done generation after generation after generation. And you go, well, you always got to cook with oil. But now you have a blanket over your taste buds, and the only way that you can actually still get the flavor out of the food now is to add a bunch of salt so that the message from your taste buds to the brain can actually happen. Okay? So if you taste this is nothing but flavor. You add a bunch of oil, then you're trying to register, the taste buds are trying to register what's in here. But with this sort of blanket in the middle, now you need a sort of a booster to the message that tells the brain, what does this taste like? But with this in the way, now you have to add the extra salt so that the message actually goes through. Take away the blanket here, and then suddenly you don't really need as much salt, if any at all, for the brain to understand or to figure out what this tastes like. What's the flavor here? So it took me a little bit to, let me readjust this here. It took me a little bit to figure that out, and luckily I did. And that's how you go, okay, we can go full flavor, take away the oil, and then you really don't need that much salt, if any at all. So
yeah, that's incredible, because when I saw you do that demonstration at Healthy Taste of LA in 2010, you called two people up from the audience, and it would like randomly selected them. When they tasted it, they really understood what you were trying to teach. Yeah. And I agree with you about, it's not that hard to not use sugar. I actually was a restaurant pastry chef for many years, and I was able to do everything with fruit, dates specifically. And with oil, it's not that hard, because if you want that mouthfeel or that fat, you could use avocado, nuts, or seeds. But salt, Chef Bravo, that's where people really struggle.
Yeah. That's the most difficult. That's probably why my boss saved that one for the very end. And yeah, it's a, you see people out in a restaurant or, when they sit down to eat, the very first thing they do before they even look at the food is they grab the salt shaker and they pour a bunch of salt on it without even tasting or nothing. And what that is their tolerance to the sodium is that much higher, okay? Because the body adapts to whatever you're doing to it. And so the more salt you consume, the more you need, kind of a thing, in order to get the same amount of flavor. And so it does take some adjusting, a couple of weeks. It was for me, maybe a little bit more, but you do need to, go through that process of like, hey, is it still the same chef? Because whoever's cooking now is doing a much better job. And again, that's reducing your tolerance to the sodium. So you don't need that much of that same chemical to get the message to the brain that tells you, hey, this tastes like roasted pepper, or this tastes like a balsamic strawberry thing. It's common for people that come to our program, they go, oh, wow, I never knew a cucumber tasted this way before. Like I've never tasted celery before. It's so good. And yet previously, they had a salad with cucumber and celery, but they pour a bunch of ranch dressing over it. There's that whole blanket on top of the taste buds, and you don't really taste it. So
I think that once people can learn to neuroadapt so that they don't need the salt and learn to cook without it the way you teach, that it's kind of a lazy way to season food.
It can be, yeah. It's a way to sort of cut corners. Yeah.
So what can people do for that missing? Like, do you have any tips and tricks that the home cook can do while they're neuroadapting to get to replace that missing from the salt?
Yeah, this is a whole another lecture that I do, so I'll give you the super speedy version. So again, I mentioned, I'll tilt it back down so you get a sort of a visual. So again, here's your tongue, your taste buds. Here's the sweet, sour, salty, umami, bitter, and the spicy. Okay, and so when you get something and the salty sort of gets activated, you're like, okay, this is good. Take away that salt, so now we cannot use this one taste bud, okay? But you still have the other ones. What happens is then, if you have a particular meal, say we take the strawberry balsamic thing, we activate the sweet and the sour, okay? And then you taste it, you're like, it needs salt. There's not that much going on here. What that means is that your brain goes, okay, there's sweet and sour here, but I'm not entertained enough, okay? And I interpret that as it needs salt, okay? So the next step would be, as I, miss the pepper in there. Okay, so you got the sweet and the sour, but then we're gonna add peppery in here. Suddenly you activate a third taste bud without using the salt, okay? Then your brain goes, oh, okay, there's a little bit more going on in here. It's not just sweet and sour. There's actually another layer in there. There's a pepper. Now I'm more entertained, okay? So the trick for me is to activate more taste buds without, focusing on the salty ones. So your brain goes, okay, there's more going on in here. It isn't just a sort of boring kind of thing, which the brain goes, oh, you need some salt. No, activate other taste buds, and the brain goes, oh, wait, no, there's other stuff here now. It's more interesting. So that's the very speedy version of that whole lecture that I do, but hopefully that'll help some people.
That's great. Well, your boss and my mentor, Dr. Alan Goldhammer, who's also a speaker on this summit, he not only doesn't allow sugar, oil, salt, but he doesn't allow chocolate. How have you been able to create that missing in people's lives when they want chocolate, but you can't use chocolate?
Let's see. I do this at home, which is raw roasted cacao beans, which is I can't use them at True North. I'm not allowed to. But for me, chocolate's sort of a big thing. But most bars have the sugar element to it. So for a sort of meet me halfway there, I just do raw cacao beans roasted, and I just eat one when I need that chocolate thing every now and then. So these I brought from Costa Rica on my last trip. They're delicious. Okay. So, yeah.
Yeah, he doesn't. My understanding is he doesn't even allow carob because he says it's a gateway drug to the use of chocolate.
Right. Yeah. So, yeah. So for people out there, yeah, that's how I do my fix.
Nice, nice. So you've seen a lot of patients come through True North over the last many years, and some of them are pretty hopeless because they've tried everything to lose weight, and it's really often the last stop on the train. And I'm sure there's people watching the summit that also feel that way. So what would you say to somebody that's given up hope that they too could lose weight?
Um, yeah, we get some people there, that it's sort of a last resort kind of a thing. But I think we are a last resort thing because it's an extreme sort of diet. You got to go whole food plant based, but without the salt, oil, and sugar. We do a sort of a big jolt there as well, which is our fasting program, which means we give you a big jug of water, and say, hey, we're going to check on you twice a day, but you don't get to eat for a few days, kind of a thing. And so what that does is just regenerates the body. The body repairs itself. Is not necessarily for everyone. Not everybody that comes into True North is allowed to do the fasting program. But if you do, I have seen nothing but great results for people when that happens. And it's sort of one of the biggest, fastest ways to readjust your neurosensors to reduce that tolerance to the sodium. And after that, it's like, wow, I have never tasted a carrot in my life before. I've never tasted a cucumber before. And it's like, there's so much flavor once people go through that. But yeah, you kind of you do water fast, and it's quite the experience. And I've done it twice myself. Not for everybody necessarily. Certainly something that everybody benefits from. Everybody could benefit from if they did it. But it's sort of scary that you go like, oh my God, I'm not going to eat. And I'm gonna be missing so much, in life because I'm not gonna eat for a certain amount of days. But in fact, you actually gain quite a bit because you gain your life back, you gain your health, you gain your body's ability to do what it's meant to do, which is to regenerate and to keep you alive and to be happy. And then you get to eat afterwards. You do get to eat afterwards.
Yeah, and when you do, it's amazing. Like when I've helped you out at the holidays there, and sometimes the first solid food that people get after the water fast is just steamed zucchini. And when they eat it, they like cry. It's like they're having food gasms over plain zucchini.
Zucchini, yeah, it's like that.
Yeah, and the thing is I never was eligible for water fasting there, and I still was able to lose 50 pounds by going there because they have other programs. They've got the juice fasting, and my favorite, of course, the unrestricted feeder.
Yeah, eat as much as you want, and you still lose weight on that because again, we go through a calorie density approach to it. So yeah, it's inevitable that you're going to lose weight.
It was so funny when I first met you. I couldn't understand why they needed a chef at a fasting center because if all they're getting is water, couldn't they just pour it themselves?
Yeah.
Not realizing you have to feed people before and after the fast.
And again, because we're doing that calorie density, there's such a high volume of food that people need in order to get the calories. So yeah.
And I think that's why it's so great. You get to lose weight with a full plate. This has been such a wonderful interview, Chef Bravo. I'd like to know what you think, though, is the real truth about weight loss.
The real truth about weight loss. To me, I would have to say eating a plant-based focused diet, eating plant-based where it's, and by that I mean like whole food plant-based, like you have whole strawberries, whole peppers, whole potatoes, because you could potentially be vegan / plant-based, but if you're eating, frozen, tater tots out of the grocery store, it's still potatoes, but it's not a whole potato kind of a thing. Sugar, quote unquote, is comes from a plant, but it's a refined thing. So rather than doing that, you could use a whole, dates, the whole thing that's all nice and sweet. So to me, that'd be the secret, to cut out the junk food, the processed food, whole food, plant-based. Eat as much as you want. No restriction on portion size. Okay, which is big. For some people, it's like, okay, you can only eat so much. It's like, no. Whole food, plant-based. You eat as much as you want, as many meals as you want. Stuff yourself silly, and you're still going to lose weight, because it's the whole food. It's all of the flavor, the fiber, all the nutrients coming from it, without any of it getting stripped away by the processing of food and packaging that you go to the frozen aisle and you get. So that'd be the secret for me.
Yeah. Well, it definitely worked for both of us, and it seems like it's worked for everybody that's ever gone to True North. So thank you so much for your incredible contribution to making this.
It can still be tasty. It isn't like, oh, I'm either going to eat tasty food or I'm going to lose weight. No, you get to have them both if you want. Okay.
That's why we have you. Thank you so much, Chef Bravo.
See, I'm not the only one who lost 50 pounds stuffing themselves silly with delicious whole plant food. So did Ramses, so did Tammy, and so many people lost even more. This is not about deprivation. This is about abundance. It's the only way I know of you can lose weight without going hungry. And he has some of the best food. I hope you'll watch this again in the video and make those recipes. They're two of the most popular dressings that they serve at the True North Salad Bar, and they're absolutely delicious. And it just shows you the importance of the environment. Chef Bravo didn't take the job at True North because he was overweight and wanted to lose weight. He wanted an easier life, not an easier, but a different type of life other than a hotel chef where he was working long hours. He wanted to be there to raise his young daughter, and just by proxy, anyone who goes to True North, anybody who goes to Santa Rosa, whether it's McDougal or True North, is going to lose weight because there is no hyper-palatable or hedonic food in the environment. And all our speakers are telling you the same thing. You've got to control your environment if you want to control your waistline. And he says same thing as the other speakers. Just stop the processed foods, stop the animal products, and remember, oil, sugar, flour, alcohol. These are processed foods. They're not healthy, and they're certainly not going to help you lose weight. So let's share some of the wonderful comments for winners of 2 virtual prizes. The first one is Lisa Marchese, and she is going to win Tammy Kramer's wonderful Mexican Fiesta. And her comment was, "Thank you for this summit. I have lost 6 pounds this week. It is truly my staying out of restaurants, which means no oil, no salt. The information on my brain and its effect is life-changing. My detox starts tomorrow." And hopefully you heard the session with Dr. Roberts about the truth about eating at restaurants. And you understand the truth about oil and salt from so many of the other speakers. And to make your weight loss journey even more delicious, you're going to enjoy Tammy Kramer's Mexican Fiesta webinar. She makes some of the most delicious recipes. And for the book, The Potato Reset, is going to Diane Hickey Ovadia. And her comment is, "What a blessing to have an outlet that supports a whole food, plant-based way of life. In this world, it is sometimes difficult to find the support and encouragement to maintain this lifestyle. This summit kind of feels like a health tune-up. Thanks for all the relevant topics. Nice to know we are not alone on this journey to health." And you're not alone, which is why we love when you comment on the page that you made this comment on and share the comments and like each other's comments and tell each other where you're from, making connections, building community. Remember, if you won a prize, whether it's today or any of the other previous 6 days, you must email us by Monday, February 17th at hello@betterlifesummits.com. And don't forget that if you choose to own this Summit for Life for a small investment in your health, you get a buddy pass so you can share it with someone absolutely free. So it's like getting 2 summits for the price of 1. And if you can't afford to buy it, please consider just sharing the link to this summit with your friends so that they can watch the free summit while it is happening. So how about tomorrow? Well, tomorrow we have some real heavy hitters, literally and figuratively, because one of our guests used to weigh over 400 pounds. But first, we start the day with Dr. Michael Greger, who has a new book out called How Not to Diet. And he is looking at the research. He did it for over a year, every single scientific research article about diet, and he wrote a book about it. And he's going to tell us what we've been doing wrong in terms of dieting and what actually works. Then we have Dr. Jen Hawk, who is going to tell us the role that trauma and personality play in weight loss. Dr. Pam Peek, who wrote The Hunger Fix, who's going to teach us how to stop overeating and recover from food addiction. And Josh Lajani, get the tissues out, because he went from over 400 pounds to running a 100-mile race and on the cover of a national running magazine. This is truly a story of perseverance, resilience, and never giving up. We have very, very inspiring speakers tomorrow, and we want to hear from you and be inspired. So if you send us your story for a more personal summit finale on Sunday, we want to hear from you at hello@betterlifesummits.com. We need to receive it by 8 p.m. Pacific time on Saturday, February 15th, to be eligible for one of the grand prizes. And we're going to be awarding many, many grand prizes on Sunday, like a Holland bowl mill for chopping salads with a free mezzalune, and Forks Over Knives annual meal plans, and multiple high-end prizes from Instant Pot. So make sure you tell us your story, what this summit has meant to you, and what it's going to mean to you in the future. So you can watch the replays almost immediately, so you can see how Chef Bravo made those delicious dressings, and enjoy the bonus interview with Dr. Dean Ornish. And we'll see you back here at 10 a.m. Pacific time for Dr. Michael Greger. I'm Chef AJ, and on behalf of Toby and myself, the brains behind the Truth About Weight Loss Summit, we thank you so much for listening.